Hello there, and welcome to UK Diesel Electric Railway Modelling. And unfortunately, last week we had a bit of a kind of, the audio stuff went wrong, and then tried a couple of tests a little while ago, and the audio was wrong with one of them, but the second one was good. So now we're going to do what we meant to do last week. And now I've got the live stream at the side going. Okay, this is my friend Mark. He's a member of DMU, so I met him, but I'd seen some of his work at shows beforehand. And, I thought that it'd been interesting to have a chat with him. Now, something I want to explain. So I'm a pretty good modeler. I get people tell me, oh, you do really great stuff. And that's really cool. But none of us exist in a vacuum. We get knowledge from other people. As we were chatting away off stream earlier, we were chatting about the first model rail shows, which were the first, diesel electric only, show. Because bear in mind, back in the sort of late 80s and the early 90s, and it's one of the reasons why DMU started up, because when you go to a show, it would be loads of steam layouts, and if you're lucky, you might get one diesel electric one. And it's like DMU started to say, look, there's more to railways than just steam stuff. A lot of people do modern image stuff because that was what the real railway is. So as a result, DMU started and things like that. But I was chatting a little while ago about how one of the things I learned from a guy called Hugh Searle, who made scratch-built Class 59s and their wagons, was plastic weld. I'd only ever used, the sort of Revel kind of stuff, the stuff in a squeegee bottle that went everywhere, unless you were really careful. But this stuff is like fantastic, so I've been using it ever since. The only time I use the other stuff is for if I need it to be something a bit more gummy, but I don't even know if that's a technical term, but it works. Anyway, so like I say, do you want to say hello, Mark? Tell us, how did you get into model railways? Did you start from being a kid at real railways, or was it some of your parents?
I have to say that my first, and I'll put this on the forum, my first memory of anything is of a train. I mean, my mum is pushing me in my pushchair down there, what is now Merton Abbey Mills, and it's a saver centre, so it's like a Sainsbury's and a Marks and Spencer thing. Mm-hmm. And there used to be a railway line running along there that is now not part of the Croydon Tram Link. It's a bit of the line that they abandoned. And she was pushing me along in a pushchair alongside this medieval wall, because Merton Abbey was a fairly large bit of owned a fairly large bit of land in South London. And we got to an opening in the wall, and a 37 went by with a brake tender, dragging a load of 21-ton hoppers. And I remember vividly that this thing was absolutely enormous. So I was so it's been downhill since there, really. I've just played with trains. If I couldn't push Brio, then I'd be, driving Hornby trains and Triang. I'm that old. They were Triang. And then I kind of took a break. I didn't really get back into railways. So from early teens until late 20s, I was plastic modelling and getting a job, getting a girl, that kind of thing. And when we got our first flat, I joined the local model railway club, and I was the youngest member there. Only by a couple of years. There's like a little group of us that are about this age, but we've just moved through, and there's some people just below us, but the whole demographic's going up. There's some 40-somethings joining the club now, but most of the new members are retiring people are going, well, I've always wanted a train set. So it's kind of, I've always done it, and I'm getting to that age now where I'm going to be retiring and playing trains, hopefully. But it's all my life. I've been doing it all my life, apart from a break when I decided to build tanks and planes and learn a lot of things. I still do. I still build tanks and planes occasionally, but that's where I get a lot of the technique. And I have a bit of Warhammer.
Yeah, I do a little bit of tanks and planes in the Warhammer level of things. My interest in the hobby started completely in the opposite direction. Other than having a train set when I was a kid, And weirdly, I had an Intercity 125. Who didn't? Blue grey one, shorty Mark threes, and I like turning off the lights and just like making them go around. I just thought that was cool. But the real reason why I got into railways at all was because I went to boarding school. I used to be into planes. My parents were in the Air Force, so my first, a bit like you said, your first memory. My first memory of a plane was, a Harrier GR3 bowing at me at the end of a show. It's like, wow, that's amazing. As opposed to everything else,
cool.
Yeah. So, so that was my hobby. I was into planes, and then, what happened was I went to boarding school, and every other weekend they'd send me home, and so I would go from Doncaster to Devon. So it was 4 hours to Exeter, another hour up to Barnstaple because we lived at RAF Chivner in North Devon. And, it was just boring. You look out the window for so long, listen to a Walkman, which needed 4 batteries in those days, for so long. And it was just boring reading a book or something. And I was complaining about it one day. And someone said, why don't you get the train numbers? And so I started, and that was 1988. And effectively it grew from there. I left that boarding school, ended up going to a different one. There was a kid there who was really into trains, and he had Motive Power magazine and Rail, and it's like, oh,
Motive Power Monthly.
I know.
Classic magazine now.
Funny thing is, I bought a bunch of these recently, and I sort of skimmed through them. That I had been having a toilet reading, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And in here, I just saw something that's like, oh my God, got to write that down because that's useful, interesting stuff. And it's where is it? It's got a list of, maybe it was the other one. It's got a list of the Transpennine Mark II rakes. It's like, wow.
Yeah, they're an absolute goldmine. I bought them when I bought them originally, and I've got them in a box file in the loft, gathering mites and dust and spiders. And every now and then I go up there and dig them out if I'm doing a bit of research around the 80s, because they're great. Unfortunately, it morphed into something else. So it started off as Motive Power, and it was like bi-monthly, I think. And then it went monthly, and then it turned into something else in about 1987, or it just stopped. I can't remember what it became. And that was it. It was kind of, after that, it wasn't quite so interesting.
Yeah,
and I stopped. It just stopped. A bit like, I can't remember. There was like a Airfix model railway magazine or something, like GMR. When in the days of Airfix and GMR, they had a magazine, and one week stopped. Like 1 month they just went, that's it. We're not doing anymore.
I don't know if this is going to be backwards or not, but it just has a list of the Mark II coaches, Mark II Bs and A's, Bs, and sometimes C's of the and C's. And it's like,
that'd be when they were. Was that when they were Transpennine or when they were blue and grey?
Yeah, these are the Transpennine ones. It says the Transpennine Newcastle to Liverpool service is now officially formed as specially liveried stock. 6 sets of book to cover 5 diagrams noted on the 12th of May were Heaton 251 and 5463, 5425, 5520, which is Mark IIC, 5316, 5614, 13519, which is Mark IIC FK. And 84242, which I thought was unusual because I thought they were all 92XXX series ones. The other ones all are, but things like that is like, that's really useful, because one of the things that I do like to do is have all my coaches as rakes, proper things, not I don't know, I like to be as authentic as possible. I find that's it definitely was that way, but I'm not. I don't have a problem with sort of getting an old getting an old one of these or something and saying, okay, well, I want to make a rake of Mark IIs on a club train, one of the North Wales, Manchester to Barrow Southport, things like that. You can look in one of these and you can figure out a rake of 5 coaches to go with it. So, stuff like that, always good. Anyway, but we're not here to talk about my stuff. We're here to talk about your stuff. So, you've set up. I've got them all here. So, let me share. So these are some of Mark's wagons, and you started talking about them last week.
Yes,
and then,
no one could hear.
So this time, go ahead.
This is my starting point, if you like. This is the colour that manufacturers think is the colour of wagons. And this is actually, in real life, it's actually more salmony than that. I think the camera's been very kind to it. It kind of looks the right colour, but it really isn't. And if you look at the edge of the roof, you can see the roof is actually the same colour, and they've just sprayed the top of it grey. That's actually plastic. They've moulded it that colour and then stamped the lettering onto the side, which is why it's nowhere near the right colour. Because when you can't make plastic the right colour, you can only make plastic close, and then you've got to spray it. And clearly, to get these wagons in at a price point, because to be fair, this is an O-gauge wagon and it's 43 quid or something.
It's a bargain.
Yeah, well, exactly. The way they do that is they make it in a close enough colour plastic and then stamp the tempo print the lettering onto it, to the extent that when I tried to get the lettering off, you can actually see the impression of all of that in the plastic where they've stamped it on.
Right.
They've tempo printed it so hard, it's actually embossed.
Yeah, and for those people who don't know how kits are made, effectively you got a mould and they just squirt plastic in. But the plastic, I used to work at one of these places that makes like Domestos. So it was a chemical factory, basically. They put bleach in bottles, but they would make the bottles. And you just have like a bag full of blue granules, these little tiny plastic granules. They stick them through a heater and make it all, wet and just squirt it into a mold under pressure. And then just pop it open, and then you pull that one off and you stick the other sets in, and so on. It just makes loads of them. You just empty it out and load it up, and it's very, very simple. So for these, they'll just be a fret, and of course when you said about making the color, well, they just went a reddy brown color of granules.
And not all of them are that one's actually not too bad, but in real life they're a bit more pinky than that. As I say, the camera's been quite kind to it. But some of them are just the weirdest colors, and that's not freight brown, or which is what everybody calls it bauxite, but it's actually freight brown. Bauxite was what the pre-nationalisation companies would have called it. So the LNER would have had bauxite, or the LMS would have had bauxite.
Right.
BR had freight brown.
Gotcha.
Because I had 3 different shades of freight grey as well. So when you look at 16 tonners, they were originally darker than when they kind of got halfway through building them, they went to rail grey, what became rail grey. Right. But it's a touch lighter, but let's call it rail grey for the sake of argument, or kind of Humbrol 64 was quite close when I was a kid. But before that, they were a darker shade. It's kind of, it's not quite rail freight grey, but it's because we only have a limited palette of colours that won't show dirt and rust.
Yeah.
It's, when you look across it, like you look across everything in the UK, actually there are not that many colours of things, which is why modern liveries are garish, because they're done on vinyl. Yeah. And they can just throw the palette away. But with these, there's only certain things certain things you can paint on wood. There's only certain things you can paint on wood and metal. There's only certain things that won't rust right away. There's only certain things that will, that'll throw coal dust off, and so on and so on and so on. So you end up with, everybody paints their wagons brown or black or grey, or red, or there's not that many colours to play with. Maroon never goes away.
I remember when Mirko went and painted their wagons in red, white, and blue, really, really bold. And it's like, wow,
that was toothpaste.
Yeah, but it's like, until then they were grey or black.
Yeah, there was a relaxation, wasn't there? Because there was a requirement that Class A tanks had to be grey and have red soul bars. Yeah. Which was in the same way that pressurised gas tanks had to be white and have an orange band around them. Yeah. It was just one of those things. And then they said, why are we doing this? Everybody knows because it's got a Hazchem on it now. We don't need to paint it grey. So paint whatever colour you like. And everybody went, yay! And just, kind of threw paint at their wagons. BP painted theirs bright green, like emerald green.
Mm.
Shell painted theirs. I think
they were still
stuck with grey and black, didn't they? But they really cleaned them.
Zigzag, didn't they?
Yeah, they put the big hockey stick on it.
Yeah.
For a while, and then they worked out that petrol's quite good at dissolving vinyls. So then after a while, they went back to being grey.
Yeah. These used to have this weird thing of like really bright, like pale blue wheels.
That was the thing. That was the thing with Shell, I think.
Yeah.
Or BP, or both. It might have been something to do with whoever was overhauling them. But yeah, they're really weird, like coloured wheels. It's a bit odd.
Yeah. Where is it? I've got pictures of pretty much everything. Although when it comes to wagons, I probably haven't got pretty much everything. Shell, what's it called? TTAs. They just have some like really weird ones with like really bright.
Yeah, really bright, like ice blue wheels.
There's one. Paul Bartlett's pictures.
Yep.
When it opens.
Anytime now.
There we go.
Oh, and the axle box as well. Not the cover. The cover's yellow because, of course, because that goes really well. But yeah, that's not uncommon in the early 90s. I've no idea why, unless whoever was producing the wheel set suddenly went, "Oh, I want to get in on the game. I want to paint mine bright colours."
Yeah. I mean, it may have just been as simple. These are new ones.
Yeah, it might have been Marcroft's because the blue label on the end, which I didn't know until recently, but that blue label on the right-hand end of the wagon is a Marcroft repair label. In the event of breakage, please phone Marcroft and a man and spanner will come out.
Yeah.
So it might be that Marcroft decided to paint the wheels blue, so you knew which ones they'd done.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, it could be.
But anyway, back to that weird brown colour. So that isn't the worst example of what manufacturers produce, but that's pretty bad because it also looks plasticky. It looks like a toy. So the next picture will show you well, it's actually a cheat because the next one's a wooden wagon, but that's more like how they looked, which is grubby, brown, and patchy with rust. I haven't taken a picture of the ends, but the ends are quite rusty. The interesting thing about these Daypole wagons is that whatever they're moulded in, you can't paint. So the first thing I did was I thought I'll just put a dark wash over it because that will work. It'll, like in a military sense, in the military modelling sense, you can just put a dark wash over it and it'll filter the colour. So a nice dark enamel wash should tone the salmony pink colour down to an acceptable brown and shade into the planks and
kind of stain it.
Wipe some of it off and it'll but it didn't dry ever. I picked one up 5 days after I'd painted it and I ended up with fingerprints on the side. It just wouldn't dry out.
Wow, that's really weird.
God alone knows what. So that is completely repainted. I had to pop the roof off, spray the whole thing with Games Workshop acrylic paint because acrylic primer was the only thing that would stick to it.
Right.
And then hand paint it in Rail Match Freight Brown, and then put the roof back on. So I sprayed the roof's actually a decent colour, bizarrely. So I just pushed the roof back on, and then I ran the enamel wash over it after I'd painted it to get the effect, and then wipe most of it off, as you can see. So it leaves all the dirt and markings around the strapping and in the planks. And then I stippled the ends with a very dark brown colour to get the rust on all the metal parts, because the real wagons have got press metal ends, which is an LMS thing, and then the sides are wooden, which is kind of pure Great Western. So BR kind of took bits of everybody else's designs and hurled them together into their standard designs. They picked all the bits out of the big four and came up with these things that are recognisably one thing or another. So it's mostly an LMS van, but the LMS vans had sliding doors,
right?
And they didn't have the money or didn't think it was worth the maintenance effort, so they've just got hinge doors on them, which is a Great Western thing. And that kind of Z strapping as well is kind of pure Great Western.
Yeah, that's very common, isn't it?
But yeah, that's one of my starting points. I did that whenever they came out a good few years back now. But I had been that's where I started doing all the stuff that I do now. Because before that, I just used to waft and airbrush at wagons. I used to paint them freight brown, and then blow them over with track dirt and frame dirt.
Right.
And if it was a loco, a bit of roof dirt, and then put them back in the box and go, there, it's weathered. And it was actually looking at MIG washes and looking at some military modelling stuff that got me into doing it differently.
Yeah.
Not necessarily all the techniques, because like salt washes and filters and use this for this and that for that, and you've got to have the right colours and all that kind of stuff doesn't really work in toy trains. You actually want to it's a bit more impressionistic. So you probably can find a picture of a wagon that looks roughly like that.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that lettering is actually not what came with the model, because I had to repaint it. So that's actually transfers, but it looks like it's been tampo printed on, because that's something else I learned from military modelling. So I paint the whole thing with floor varnish, which is clear. So clear is an acrylic floor varnish. It's now sold as something like Pledge, I think.
Yeah.
Or Johnson's Future, or it depends where you live. Sometimes it's called Future, sometimes it's called Pledge.
Yeah, Future's the American stuff.
Yeah, so they still sell it, although it's now it's slightly milky when you tip it out the jar, but it dries clear.
It's like
it used to be called, it used to be called Clear with a K, but it is actually an acrylic. They call it floor polish, but it's actually an acrylic varnish that's pre-thinned. So you paint your model with that, then you put your transfers on, then you give it another coat.
Yep.
And the thing about Clear or Future or Pledge, wherever you happen to be living, is that it's self-leveling. So if you put the wagon on its side and give it a coat, it actually dries. It will self-level across the model. And then you give the thing a coat of matte varnish afterwards. And Clear is almost inert. The only thing it doesn't like is meths, as I found. But everything else doesn't react to it. So you can use enamel varnish on it, you can use acrylic varnish on it, you can brush it, you can brush over it, or you can spray. Doesn't really matter. So as long as you haven't got anything too volatile in like meths or some thinners, it makes no difference. So a rattle can of spray varnish just gives you that matte finish.
Right.
But that means that all those transfers, decals, again, wherever you live, look like they've been printed onto the model. They don't look like transfers because there's no edge.
Yeah, I've done the same. I do the same kind of thing. Clear transfers, clear, and then you just tone it down with whatever you want to do it. And it doesn't even have to be even as well, because you've got certain parts of the body which might be a bit more shiny, and other bits that aren't.
Yeah, I mean, with these, obviously wooden vans, you have to matte varnish because wood never shines.
Yeah.
Even with a coat of paint, because the thing is, wood's natural, so it just sucks the stuff in because it wants the moisture and the oils and stuff. So everything goes matte when you paint wood. But the metal would be shiny because it doesn't soak anything up. So that's one of those. An awful lot of engineers' stock is wooden, as I found. That's the other thing. So everything has to be matte varnished. For sure, there shouldn't be anything shiny because it's nearly all wood. Anyway, what have we got next? I can't remember what we've got next. I'm cheating. This is all O-gauge, and I'm really not doing a lot of O-gauge modelling at the moment. This is the Daypole brake van.
Yeah, I know you've got a lot of brake vans, don't you?
Maybe. So you can see there's a 4mm model in the background, so you can tell it's an O-gauge model. And it's a nice model. Don't get me wrong. The Daypole brake van, again, it's like 70 quid, which for ready to run in O-gauge is bobbins. It's pennies. But again, it's a very strange colour. But they seem to have moulded it in a slightly different plastic, because for this one, what I started to do, well, firstly, went and had to look on Paul Bartlett's website at brake vans, because it's a bit of a weird, in modelling terms, it's a bit of a weird thing. The handrail that it comes with is a 3-part handrail, which only the first 1,000 or so, or 1,115 or whatever it was, brake vans had, which is the LNER style 3-part handrail. So it goes into the body side. Basically, the handrail goes into the body and comes out in a sort of hang on, just move that across like that. In thirds across the width of the body.
Correctly, didn't the LNE the step stop over here?
They did, and the first batch of so the Diagram 1500 vans had the short footboards because the LNER had already put concrete weights on their vans towards the end of their build. So they started out with a flat steel plate, and they had enough ballast weight inside the frames to build the weight up. But during the war, obviously, scrap metal was not the sort of thing they'd just be dishing out to put in. So they started to fill the space with concrete blocks, but concrete is slightly less dense than steel. Right. And so in order to bring the tear weight up to 20 tons, they built a metal frame around the ends, and then just poured concrete into it,
gotcha,
and then ran a plank across it, kind of across to level it off. So you can actually see the shuffle marks where they've gone across with a bit of timber to screed it off.
Yeah, concrete was very well used in the war, wasn't it? I mean, they built ships out of concrete.
My granddad actually poured Mulberry Harbours. He didn't know what they were for, but he spent a year pouring Mulberry Harbours. But yeah, so that's so the Daypole van is sort of it's mostly BR. So it's got long footboards, it's got concrete weights, it's got 1-part handrails at the ends and down the sides. So the LNER style in the Diagram 500 ones, the handrails at the ends, the little ones over the platforms, actually went into the handrail that comes down on the end of the platform into a 3-part joint. And that handrail stopped short, and there was like a hand grab in the bottom 6 inches or so. So it was actually, so you basically had 3 parts of handrail on the end of the van. The long handrail on the inside of the veranda end, which has got the one going across, did the same thing. So it didn't actually go under the body side like this one does. It stopped short, and there was like a little hand grab on the bottom. And BR later welded bits of metal over them to make them a single handrail. And I think it was because they wanted to discourage, because basically those hand grabs were there for the shunter to hang on to. So he could stand on the footboard and just hang on to the van on his own little grab. But they wanted to discourage that. So they made it a single part handrail. So they kind of had to stand either on the top footboard or actually on the veranda, which is a damn sight safer.
Yeah.
But Daypole had not moulded that, but they had moulded a 3-part handrail all the way across. So it's like this curious, weird concoction of design. So that's a brass, you can just about see it, it's a brass replacement that's soldered up for that enormous H piece. Other than that, it's not bad. And it's got that epoxy semicircular rain strip over everybody's brake vans have got a semicircular rain strip over the top. Everybody's. Hornby do it. Even the new Hornby ones have got semicircular rain strips. The Bachmann one, the mainline one, this Daypole one, because the drawing's got a semicircular rain strip on it. It's possible that the prototype that BR built, where they churned it out of, wherever it came out of Darlington, had a curved rain strip on it. But even the LNER, I don't think, used curved rain strips after the first time they turned them out, because curving timber requires skill, and post-war nobody had that skill because it was one of those things that was dying out. So every picture of a brake van from the 50s onwards that you can find, it's a bit of timber nailed to the roof and it's straight.
Yeah. Just see a line there.
That's unusual because that's actually full length. Usually it's just an angled bit of timber like that. Sometimes they go down towards the back and sometimes they come down towards the front. Doesn't much matter. But they're not curved. They're never curved. And yet every manufacturer insists on putting a curved rain strip on the roof, which is just intensely annoying because the first thing you've got to do is sand the bloody roof.
Yeah.
And then repaint it because you've sanded it because they don't mould it in the same colour it's painted.
I've never noticed that before. Looking at these now, I'm looking at, this is never so slight curve. That one
but that's actually physically bent. Curved like they do on the models requires you to steam the timber and bend it round a former. So you'd have to have a proper woodworking shop. Post-war, we didn't do that anymore. We were welding stuff and it was a brave new world and that kind of skill had died out. probably in the 30s, probably in the railway workshops. They were the last places that did that. We didn't make our own furniture; machines made it, so it had to be straight and square and easy to peg. So it's one of those lost skills that, and BR couldn't be asked because it took time. You had to steam the timber; it probably took all day. Whereas getting a bit of 3-inch square and nailing it to the roof took you about 5 minutes.
There's an early one with a short steps.
Yeah, short footboards and 2 lamp irons on the end. That's an LNER giveaway because they had twin lamp irons. They also had a side bracket as well, but you can tell this is a BR one because it's got a side one on the body side, whereas BR always had them on the end of the veranda on the uprights. The early diagrams had a 2-part window pane in the door as well. So a BR diagram, so a proper BR van has got a 4-pane window in the door like that. So there's always a cross in the window frames, whereas the diagram 500s and the LNER ones have 2 tall, thin window panes in the van door.
Yeah, this is really steep ones, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's also pretty fresh because you can see that's raw timber. Even though they've painted the roof yellow, they've obviously had to replace the timber.
Yeah,
that's not white. That's just clean.
Those look straight, but hard to tell at that.
Is that the one that Holby did?
I don't know.
I think that might. They did a ZTO. I think that's the one they did because that's quite interesting because it's got plated veranda ends. Because if they were going to transfer it to the engineers, they usually didn't care. So they would have just had bits of timber with plywood nailed over the holes. But if the end's plated, then it's probably been in traffic. There's another one. So it's probably seen traffic use. In fact, that's the last diagram. So that's one of the very last ones built.
Yeah.
Although the very, very last ones built were the 6 for London Underground.
Oh, right. Okay.
Did you know that?
I might have
B580 to B585, I think, are the build numbers. But they're interesting in that they are the very last brake vans that were churned out from Ashford. So they're the last ones built. And at that stage, the diagram 507, which was the last BR ones.
Is this one of them, or
no? That's just paint. That's a 506 or 507 van painted for moving stock. But London Underground themselves had 6 brake vans for service trains.
Yeah.
And so at this stage, BR, they had roller bearings, they had 2-foot oleo buffers, they had vacuum piping, and Ashford had already started to take older vans in and start air piping them. The ones they turned out for London Underground at the very end should have been state of the art, but they had plate front axle boxes, 18-inch self-contained buffers. They didn't even have screw couplings. They were just loose couplings. It's an unbelievable throwback to like 15 years previously on the very last ones that they built. It's almost like they kind of went into the storeroom and went, I've got half a dozen of these. Let's use these. Anyway, back to the van. So that colour is a bit, again, it's a bit salmony. And it's also, if you look inside the veranda, it's a bit of a weird colour. The outside is actually dry brushed with a Games Workshop pink called Pink Horrors. So the left-hand end of that van, I've dry brushed it with a pink paint to start to make it look like faded freight brown.
Yeah, it's almost like
the first stage.
It's almost like it's so slightly fleshy, isn't it? That shade of pink.
I mean, you open the pot and it's really pink. Yeah, when you dry brush it on, it filters it.
Can I just interrupt you? Is that you got a bit of rattling or something going on with your microphone? Maybe is it hitting your zip or something?
Oh yeah, sorry. Hang on. There you go. How's that?
Yeah, might limit your speaking.
That's all right. I'll just hold it up now.
Okay, fair enough.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Sorry, you were saying.
That's all right. It's because this is all snagged up. Yeah. So again, Daypole van, it's not a bad model, but yeah, it's got the handrails in the side. Again, those little grab rails for getting on the roof. Yeah. I can't remember why you wanted to get on the roof, but there should also be a grab on one side, there's actually a third grab above one of the other two, and then there's one on the roof as well on the LNER vans.
Right.
Nobody ever climbed on the roof of them. God alone knows why you'd want to. So
The only thing I can think of is like maybe scrape away some of the stuff on, around
it's probably for poking. It's probably for poking pigeons on the chimney.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking about. My head went to Father Ted, and it's like, like with Father Jack in the chimney, and it's like, shall I burn him out? Father.
Yeah, but other than that, I can't think why you'd want to get on the top now. Just poke a dead bird out of your chimney, or persuade it to push off. But yeah, BR took those handrails off quite early on to stop people climbing on the roof, because as soon as they started putting up overhead electrification, it became quite dangerous to stand on the roof of a brake van.
It's one of the things that I find really distressing in a way, when I hear some story, because it happens somewhat frequently where I live. When I say somewhat frequently, maybe once every year or two or something like that, where you hear some story of some kids who decided they're going to go and walk on the railway in Liverpool, and they go and touch that third rail, or some people got into Longsight and tried climbing on a train, and it's like, and there was one last year, I think it was, maybe even the start of this year, where some drunk idiot decided he was going to try and climb on the back of a Pendolino.
And yeah.
Well, I don't think he expected it to jump in the way that 25 kilovolts does.
Well, what people don't know is that if you make a path for it, it will travel up the path back to you. So there have been examples of people throwing sticks off of over bridges at trains, and if it hits the wire, the fact that the stick has created a vortex in the air as they've chucked the stick is enough to give the electricity something to come back at. So the stick hits the wire, and they'll get a shock off of it, which is why you should never throw anything off a bridge. It doesn't have to be a shopping trolley. Anything, if it touches the wire, but if it's a damp enough day, which it usually is in the northwest, you'll get zapped, and that's happened as well, where people have chucked stuff off bridges and just got 25,000 volts coming back the other way.
Yeah, I'll just say something. Timbersurf was talking about chevrons on the must be one of the photos.
Oh, that's interesting. That probably means that's an electrification van, or it's used for propelling moves. It's in engineer's olive though, so it's probably in the electrification trains. Yeah, so they put the chevrons on the end because the electrification trains would be pushed backwards and forwards on the work site. So effectively, that's like a shunter. It's the other end to a shunter, although it wouldn't be. It'd be a bloody great big loco at the other end. But they put chevrons on it because that was what they did. I mean, they could have painted it yellow, but then you'd confuse that with a traffic van, and the engineers wouldn't want that. They wouldn't want traffic nicking their vans out the yard. So they put chevrons on it so that the people rostering the trains would know not to touch it.
Yeah, and not only that, I suppose, if you think about engineering stuff, when you've got engineering works going on, pretty much everything there is painted yellow. Track machines.
It is now. Yeah. It didn't used to be then. It used to be green or golf red or rust.
I was thinking
grey and yellow.
And all those sorts.
But these days, everything's yellow because you can definitely see it. But the van at the end, there's another one. That's definitely electrification because it's got that big blue stripe over it. Yeah. They tended to do that if they were going to be propelling. That's also a northeastern style van. I suspect that is actually an LNER van because it's got a tall vacuum pipe and short footboards.
There's all sorts.
There's the Old Oak Common one. Yeah. And the load haul one's quite interesting.
Yeah,
I think that's somewhere down in Kent. Oddly, because the load haul had the job to run the flow. I think, but that's used for propelling moves, which is why which is what the little yellow box is. So the yellow box is actually covering up a valve, a brake valve. So and there's a sun shield over the end of the veranda. Can you see that?
There's a bunch of things to see there.
So a chap would stand there in an orange coat with a radio, and he'd be talking to the driver, but he'd actually be applying the brake. So just inside that little yellow box, there'll just be a brake handle, and he can actually put the brakes on instead of having to go inside and pull the lever inside. It's unusual because normally the way they did those conversions, they'd actually run the brake pipe up across the veranda and up the front, up across the end and up the front of it to the pipe. So that's actually been kind of professionally done.
It's also got plywood sides as well.
Yeah, there wasn't very many of those all plywood. That's probably one of 3 or 4 that had all plywood sides.
Yeah. That looks like another electrification one. Well, no, actually, it hasn't got the stripes, but it's certainly on.
It does say CCE though, doesn't it? CCE use only. So that'll be
civil engineer.
Yeah, I don't know what the first C stood for. Chief Civil Engineers use only. Yeah, so that'll be that's probably in engineering trains.
Yeah.
And that's probably hauled. So that'll be either staff accommodation or it will actually be on the back of the train for actual brake van purposes, because it's not got any yellow bits on it.
Yeah, hasn't got any yellow. Doesn't have any pipes as well. I don't see any.
ZTO, and it's an early diagram because it's got 2 lamp irons on the end.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, we digress. Brake vans.
Yeah.
Stop it. Stop it.
Should we jump to
this was just me talking about. So that is what it's like when it's finished. So it's not pink. It is just
almost looks like it's
brown.
Yeah, it almost looks like it's painted maroon, doesn't it?
Well, that's the thing. I think that some patch painting was done in freight maroon, because there were an awful lot of pictures on Paul Bartlett's website where you look at that brake van and think, those aren't bauxite or freight brown. That's not freight brown. Yeah. That's too red, and it can't fade to red. The freight brown, the early freight brown, the bauxite colour, will start to fade to a pinky shade. So if it's already dark red, there's no way that it can be anything other than a dark red to start with. So I think they patch painted some of these vans in what was current at the time, which would have been freight maroon in the late 70s, early 80s.
That's the low gauge.
Yes.
Same one.
Yeah, that's an Omen Miniatures guard leaning over the veranda and a couple of crew in the cab of a Daypole 08.
Now you see, I've thought about one of the things you could do with a brake van would be to put a smoke generator in it.
Yeah, and have the stove on. Yeah, I think that, and in O gauge that's entirely possible. In 4mm, it's probably just a little bit too small. You'd probably melt the plastic, because you'd need a fairly big heatsink, because it does get quite warm, and I'm not sure there's anywhere to put that much metal. But in O gauge, you can actually kind of put it up on, you can kind of screw it to the floor on a couple of screws and suspend it inside the space so it warms the air up. Yeah. But yeah, that looked quite cool. But yes, so this is.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Move on. Let's stop talking about brake vans. It's all too exciting. I did this for this year's virtual lid. If anybody's a DMU member, we had a virtual lid this year. This is a Bachmann weathered van that I have de-weathered. And then I've also painted the underframe. I've painted the underframe in a custom dark grey colour. So that's basically just an acrylic black and an acrylic dark grey mixed together to make a very dark grey.
One of the things...
we talk about Charadon granite, which is what I used to use, which was a Games Workshop colour. And I've now found an army painter colour called Hardened Carapace, which is Charadon granite. So that is the colour that I actually paint my underframes. And then I give it a wash with a black ink to shade it. So it looks black, but it isn't.
I've been doing a similar thing, that Charadon granite shade that Games Workshop used to do, but stopped doing because they changed factories where the paint came from. Some of them were always going to be standard ultramarine blue, blood red, things like that. But it has that really nice warm hue to it, so it just warms up a bit.
But it also looks like dirty black underframe. So I don't need to weather them anymore. I don't need to spray them anymore. I can do this all by hand with acrylic paint. So I can basically I could actually sit in front of the telly and not annoy the missus because it doesn't really smell of anything. I don't. I sit in a completely different room, which annoys the missus, and do it.
The other thing as well is that when you get them ready to run, often they're just black shiny plastic. rather than
Yes.
painted.
Yeah,
And
that's right. It is just moulded plastic. So it's always best to give it either a blaster matte varnish or give it a coat of paint. And it's a shame because they're getting really good at printing builders plates and wheel profiles and wheelbases and things on the underframe parts now, which they never used to. And so you have to paint over it.
You know what it reminds me of? Lima yellow.
But they used to mould their entire body shell in Lima yellow, didn't they?
That was basically it. What I'm explaining to those of you listening. So Lima models, they never used to paint the ends yellow. They used to have yellow plastic and then paint everything but the yellow. So they would just not bother. So one of the things that I would frequently do is mask off the yellow and paint that, because it looked plastic. It's plasticky and shiny, much more shiny than the rest of everything else. So it just looked a bit odd. So when I see when this was ready to run or something, well, if it was a clean ready to run as opposed to a weathered one, then you'd have like a nice shiny plastic chassis with a painted blue body on the top, and it just looked weird. So it's the same thing. I get in there with some matte varnish, or paint it black and then get some weathering in there.
Yeah, absolutely. The point of this one, I think, was to say that if you buy a weathered model, unless it's weathered in this country, so Heljan, bless them, have had I think it's Mersig models, wherever they are, in the West Midlands somewhere, I think, or wherever they are. They actually do the weathering master, and then they send that to China, and the Chinese copy it. But everything else, they've just gone, oh yeah, just cover it in dirt. But in China, dirt is an entirely different colour to dirt in Europe. If you're a military modeler, there's European mud, and there's like Asian mud and steppe dirt, and the colour that Chinese factories use for Bachmann and Hornby factory weathering is, as far as I can tell, a colour called steppe dust, which is the colour of the steppes. From the Urals all the way to the far side of China, that is the colour of dirt. But it's not our dirt. Our dirt is much, much browner for whatever reason, geology, clearly. But our dirt is much, much browner. And that's why factory weathered models always look so wrong, because they're not, it's not our dirt, basically. And luckily, because they basically, this model, if you look at it, is exactly the same as the previous one, except for the tops code and the number. And if you look at the other blue model that they do, you can actually see that bits of the lettering is slightly whiter, because that's the bit they've added. So they make a blue van, and then they tampo print most of the lettering on it. So all the little lettering is tampo printed onto the base model, and then they shove a load into a warehouse somewhere, and they bring them out and then tampo print a different number and tops code. And so that's an NOV. Previously, it would have been a PMV. I think the one they did before had PMV there.
I thought it was NQ for
yeah, NQVs, because NOVs were the BR ones, weren't they? Or was that MPV? I can't remember now. Anyway, whatever that is, the previous model they did had PMV on it instead, which is the old SR and SECR code for the van. And it's a different shade of white. You can see it's a different shade of white because they printed it at a different time. So they print that and then they weathered it and pushed it out the door, because the first one was pristine, this one was weathered. And they just obviously made all the body shells at some stage in the past and just put them in a shed and shut the door.
Right. Is it just me? Is that a fingerprint on the middle?
I don't know. I think it's a smear. It's not there anymore. I think it's probably where I actually, it might actually be gloss, because I think I took this picture. It was still wet from the cotton bud, because I kind of finished it and I put it down and then took the picture. So it's probably it might be a wet fingerprint with white spirit on it.
Gotcha.
It's not on the model now. So
I see a nice bit of fresh BR blue at the top here. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because the colour that the van itself is painted everywhere else is Bachmann's interpretation of rail blue, but that actually is rail blue.
And they've put it on to make it look like freshly painted, but the rest of it should be slightly more faded than that colour. That colour should be darker than the rest of the van, and it's not. It's the other way round. Your brain kind of goes, oh yeah, look, replacement planks. But in reality, they would actually be filthy with a blue plank. And that's the other thing about wood, of course, because wood also soaks dirt up like it's going out of fashion. So it's entirely possible that the blue has faded, but the wood would still be dark because it would be full of dirt that wouldn't ever wash off. But the hinges shouldn't have gone the same colour as the woodwork because they're metal. So there's all these things that they don't think about too hard. But if you buy a Helljan model that's been weathered, they do a really good job with that because they get the colours right because they do it over here and then send it off to China to copy. Anything you buy ready to run, see that? So that blue is definitely faded, isn't it? Yeah, even though it's filthy, it's faded.
Yeah, I've done something similar. When I did, let me just jump back a little bit.
But yeah, that's kind of the point of that was basically to get the factory weathering off. It's really easy. You can get it off with meths. Meths on a cotton bud and just sit there rubbing at it for a while. It will all come off, except in the crevices. So then what you have to do is basically wash the model with a dark wash to cover up the light bits you've got left over.
Yeah, there's an example of a coach I did, and you can see how I've gone and painted. I painted
it's a faded rail blue before you've weathered it.
Yeah, and I put a bit of fresh BR blue over the top to imagine like someone just got a bit of masking tape, stuck it around it, painted it, and of course it was fresh blue. So you can see a little bit more showing through there.
Yeah, they've gone over the newspapers.
Yeah, but when it was the original, this is before I put any weathering on. As soon as it opens, come on, open. Oh, I hadn't clicked on it enough. I basically
nice patchy faded.
Yeah, and the way that I do this is basically I start with a kind of bleached out one. So I take BR blue, I stick a bit of a very pale blue, pale grey in there. So I'm not changing the color, I'm changing the light intensity. I'm bleaching it out, effectively desaturating it, and I just paint it, and I keep the brush moving. I keep the airbrush moving, so it's not got lines going down it and things like that.
No, and that's a big technique amongst aero modelers now. So for plain aircraft finishes, that's exactly what they'll do to make the model slightly more interesting. Yeah. So they'll paint the base tone onto a wing or a fuselage, and they'll go over it with a slightly desaturated version of the colour, and they'll just literally mottle. They'll just move the brush around and mottle the surface finish to make it look patchy and faded.
Yeah. Okay.
But
so let's move to
rail yellow. That's a custom mix of Games Workshop acrylics.
Right.
To get that. And actually, if you look carefully, the jib is a different colour to the body because I painted them at different times and I couldn't reproduce the mix. But that was to talk about yellow things. Because again, if you're going to do a model, take a look at photos of the real things because very few things are actually rail yellow. They're rail yellow the day they paint them. But a week later, they're a different colour. And most engineers stock in BR days, because I'm not talking about now, but in the period I'm modelling, which is towards the end of BR, engineers' stock was plentiful and was dedicated to the engineer. So it spent 5 days a week sat in a yard getting rained on and bleached in the sunshine. And then at the weekend, it got dragged out, used, then they washed it before they put it back. Now that everybody leases wagons, nobody gives a stuff. So they're filthy, rusty. You can't read the lettering on them. They're covered in graffiti because it's not theirs. They don't care anymore like BR used to. BR had to look after their stuff because the government wasn't giving them any money for new ones. Whereas when you're leasing them, you run it till it falls apart and then you say to the leasing company, buy me another 100.
Yeah.
Scrap this lot. Well, I'll get me some more. And the leasing company goes out and sources a load and then charges you through the nose to run them. And that works for them, but it makes the railways a very dirty place for for engineers' stock. Whereas BR used to hose everything down. You look at a post-privatisation sea cow, you can't tell what colour it is.
Yeah.
You look at a 1994 Seacal, you know exactly what colour it is because they washed it down every time they used it.
Yeah.
But
Just
of course, that would fade the paint as well.
there are two Games Workshop yellows. One
Ooh,
is
which one's that?
this one is Flash Gits yellow.
Oh yeah, that's a good colour. That's like the old sunshine yellow, I think.
And this one's a slightly darker one, which is Uriel yellow.
Yeah.
And it's a bit hard to tell, but you know,
the Flash Gits yellow is a little richer, isn't it?
This one's quite an orangey one, whereas
Yeah.
this one's a very pale one, which is the Flash Gits one.
Yeah,
and
so the orangey one's quite good for new rail yellow.
Yeah, it's not quite right. So when I do, if I need to just do little touching up or something, then I'll use half and half.
Yeah, well, that's basically what I use that Avalanche Sunset. So I mix it with the base. So I'll start with Avalanche Sunset, which is a sort of mustardy colour. Stick some white in it and then stick either Iriel or Flash Gits, or I've still got some Sunshine Yellow into it. And that will give me roughly a fresh but slightly faded warning panel yellow. So that's what I've done with that. And of course, mixing a base, because just for anybody who doesn't go into a Games Workshop store, they tend to do colours in several styles. So they do a base paint range, which is effectively you spray an undercoat onto your soldier. You then paint it with a base coat, which is a fairly pigment dense colour to get the basic colours in. And then you use what they call layer paints to do all the highlighting and the details and the neatening up. But the base coats are great for mixing because they've got such a great paint density. You can use, they do a base coat white and yellows and reds and all sorts. So anything you mix into them has that density of pigment in it, which means you can basically thin it with a bit of water and paint with it straight over an undercoat and not worry about the undercoat showing through. So I undercoated this whole thing black, I think, before I started. Then I did the top of the body in white and then just started painting over the top in yellow paint. And I didn't need to worry about it looking streaky or patchy because using the base colour as a basis of the mixing meant that I was confident that I'd get coverage. And that's what I do with all my engineers, the yellow and grey stuff. They usually, I undercoat them black, then I paint the grey on, then I either mask it or if it's planked, I just very carefully paint over the top of the grey with the yellow, knowing that it's not going to show through.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a very yellow wagon.
Yeah. This is one of the Bachmann. I forgot what it is now.
It's a Bolster C.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I don't. Do they still? Is it a Bolster C? Is that what they sell it as, or do they sell it as a McCaw something?
I think I
can't remember now.
As McCaw, yeah.
I know that, or is that the Hornby one? Because the Bolster A was a Great Western wagon. BR never actually built any.
This looks like C.
This comes. I think this Bolster C comes with Dean Churchwood brake gear on it, so I think it is a McCaw of some sort, but I can't remember what it is. But all Bachmann Bolster Cs are the same. So it doesn't matter what sort of wagon you're talking about. Bachmann will sell you basically something with Great Western brake gear and plate frame bogies under it. And that rather limits them because BR, in true BR fashion, kind of went through a lot of changes with the wagons as they built them. Yeah. So they started off with plate frames, then they went to I think they started off with plate frames with roller bearings, which was unusual. Then they went to Davis and Lloyd cast bogies, which are a bit like Gloucester's, but not. Because I think they're an AAR design, the Association of American Railroads. It's an AAR design. All of those cast bogies, so Gloucester Mark IVs, Ride Control, Davis and Lloyd, they're actually variations on an American bogie design, as far as I can tell, and they're made under license. So Commonwealth bogie isn't our Commonwealth; it's the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Steelworks.
Oh, right, okay.
So again, the Commonwealth bogie is actually an American design. But yeah, so BR firstly went to Davis and Lloyd bogie, and then they also vacuum braked the van, so the wagon. So the Bachmann model is a I think it is vacuum fitted, but it's only got one cylinder. When BR vacuum fitted them, they fitted 2 cylinders, one at each end. So there's a handbrake at each end operating the gear. Whereas on the Dean Churchward, there's basically a handbrake in the middle, which operates off the single cylinder, or releases the single cylinder and works the brake gear at both ends. Whereas BR had effectively independent braking on each bogie. So it's all self-contained, and there's a lot of V hangers under there and brake levers and rodding and stuff, which the Bachmann model doesn't have. But this one is it's interesting because it caught my eye because it's yellow and it had these weird things on the deck and this huge toolbox. That toolbox is about, I think it's something like 4'6" tall. It's enormous.
It looks like it's in, like, I don't know, G gauge or something.
Oh, oi! Sorry, there's a fox taking a shit on my lawn. Sorry. Oi! Unbelievable. Lovely. It could be worse.
Yeah, it could be Fox Transfers.
Oh, so it's not Fox Transfers taking a shit on my lawn.
That was the word.
I'm going to have to go out there and throw things at it in a minute if it doesn't get out my eye line. It's quite off-putting. Yeah, the toolbox is enormous, but I think the toolbox had screw-in eyes and straps and all sorts chucked in it. So it's quite a bit. It's like an industrial-sized toolbox, the sort of thing you'd find on the back of an Arctic or like a sight lorry or something. It's not in any way man-portable, and it's also got on the end of it. It's got clips that look like you can drop something into it and lift it off the wagon.
Right.
I don't know how. And I don't know if they ever did, or maybe that's just how they got it on when they made it. But it's got these sort of fittings on the end that look like you could drop something into it.
Looks like something off a ship or something.
Yeah, could be. It could be but it is like a toolbox. So it's got a folding lid with one of those overlapping tops, where and it's got on the real thing. It's got like little hoops on it for you to put padlocks on, which I couldn't model because they're tiny. But it's got it's this enormous box, and you put this tiny padlock on it. It's weird. Yeah. But those things are cast weights. They on the real thing, they've got tiny lettering on them, telling you how much they weigh. So the big ones weigh about 24. I think they weigh 2,400 pounds.
Right.
It's 2,400 of your English pounds, not your American pounds. And the middle-sized ones were 1,600 pounds, and I think they had a 1,200 pound one as well. And I didn't know what that was, but it looked really interesting, so I modelled it. The other thing is that they're not all strapped down.
Yeah, I noticed.
So in the photo of the real thing, they're basically relying on the 2 on the outside of each half to stop the one in the middle falling off the end.
Right.
So it can slide about on the deck. I doubt it slides about on the deck because it weighs 1,600 pounds. It's not going to move, probably. But there's nothing restraining it. It would just slide backwards and forwards till it's smacked into one of the other bits. Yeah. Like the one next to the toolbox is held in place by the one next to it. It's not itself held down on real thing. And I asked about, and it turns out that those are test weights for the civil engineering cranes and the breakdown cranes.
Ah, right.
That's why they've got weights stenciled on them. So what you do is you take them to wherever there's a depot where they need to check the crane out, and you stack them up, and the slot in the middle of them, they fit in a frame, which might be what's inside the box. So it's like it's just like a box, like a simple box steel structure, and you slot them into it until you get the weight you want, and then you get the crane to lift it up.
Right.
And you say that's what 5 tons is like. So your crane should work. You've got to have this because all cranes are designed to lift a certain weight at a certain extension and angle off the horizontal and all that sort of stuff. Angle off the not horizontal, off the line of the track. So they have to put outriggers out, and they have to have the jib really tall, and they can only lift heavy weights really close to the center of the crane. If it's a lightweight and they've got the jib out, then you can only lift like a 75-ton breakdown crane can probably only lift a ton if its jib's fully extended.
Yeah.
To lift 75 tons, the jib's got to be like that, which is why you usually see 2 cranes kind of lifting heavy things, and they're like this, and they're just swinging very small distances because they can only lift effectively at really high angles when it's really close to the pivot. So that's what those are for. They basically hang it off the crane and calibrate the crane and then they take them away again. Well, these days they come on the back of a lorry.
Yeah, I saw an interesting picture of a crane in a crane book, the Tatlow book, where they've got one and they're trying to sort of get it under the bridge that it's next to.
Yeah,
which I thought was really amazing.
and it doesn't quite fit.
Well, no, I mean it did. It did. Let's have a look. The picture was right over. Oh, there it is. You keep talking. I'll tell you what. I'll jump to the
next one. Next picture. Oh, Freight Red. Well, this is back to me in my Games Workshop colours again.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is this. Why do manufacturers do this sort of thing? All Hornby models, apart from the one with graffiti and the ones they've just issued. So they've issued a 3-pack of the preserved wagons, I think, to put some funds towards preservation. But until then, the only wagon, the only coal hopper that they did in Rail Freight Red was the one with graffiti all over it, which were really badly applied transfers, which you could pick off with your fingers, as I found out when you take it out the box accidentally. Everything else, the cradle that comes with your HAA and your HBA and your, God knows what else they do, HFA, everything comes in EWS maroon.
Yes.
And it's actually got in tiny letters at the right-hand end. It actually says TLF Southeast. So it's not EWS maroon. It's, well, I don't know. I can't explain it. It's got Trainload Freight Southeast, which is a pre-privatisation company.
Yeah,
and it's in EWS maroon. You know, just what's going on, Hornby. But every model they ever did has got the cradle that colour until they started doing some individual ones. So Harbour and Hobbies had them done in Caledonian blue, which they used in the early 2000s. And then it's not mainline blue; it's a different shade.
Yeah, mainline blue is the aircraft blue that they used on the original Start blue.
Yeah, so it's a lighter blue than that. And I think Harburn had some limited editions done where they got the lettering right as well.
Yeah, I found that picture.
Go on then.
There it is.
Oh yeah, that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? So they've got to try and get that under the bridge.
I can't even see the picture now.
Yeah, but they've picked something up, and now they've got to try and manoeuvre it under the bridge, still attached to the crane.
Yeah,
that'd be fun. But you can see the angle of the crane, so that's lifting close to its maximum load, probably.
Yeah, and of course
it's probably something like a 15-ton crane, 10 or 15 tons. It's not very large.
Yeah, because they can't afford them to over tilt.
No, what, like the Kirov outside Waterloo?
The what? Sorry,
the Kirov outside Waterloo. We've got a brand new crane with 165-ton lift capacity. We're going to use it to replace some point work. We're going to park it on the Windsor lines, and we're going to replace the point work over on the southwestern side. Oops! It fell over.
Yeah.
It was only it's 165-ton capacity, but it's the jibs right out, and they didn't put the outriggers out. They just slewed it around and went oops, and it just fell across all the running lines.
Yeah.
Got a bit of an earth fault there, I think, in the signal box. It was very embarrassing, and literally they just pushed it back up on the Monday, so it fell over on the Sunday, screwed up the timetable. But Monday morning they literally they turned all the power off and they just jacked it back up until it balanced itself back onto the rails. The wheels hadn't left the rail. It didn't derail. It just fell over, and they literally pushed it back up, checked it over, and dragged it away. But yeah, bizarre. You got all that lift capacity. Brake van. See, now that's a propelling van.
Yeah, so, wasn't it one of the one that was used in around Immingham?
Sunderland South Dock.
Ah, right. I knew it was somewhere.
So they split the train in two, and they propelled both halves down the incline to the dock. So they had at some, I think it was Sunderland South Steamshed. I found a picture. In fact, you might have supplied me with the picture.
I think I did. Yes.
And there are 4 pairs of these vans. Count them, 4. So there are 2 pairs like this, and there were 2 pairs in an older livery. Now that's had the working instructions painted out. And you'll also notice it's still got all the handrails on the side, the little grab rails.
Yeah.
And I've added the third one to it because the van that you sent me the picture of still had all its handrails. And this is like 1990.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. It's also missing some of the lamp irons on the corner, but I didn't want to go that far. I thought, because in order for it to move off of the Sunderland South branch, I'm assuming they'd have to bolt the lamp irons back on. But it looks like what they've done is it had turned up either they took the lamp irons off because they didn't need them, or they got in the way, or they needed them for something else. So you can see the bolt holes. They've not been removed and filled in. It's like they've taken them off to, I don't know, paint them or give them a scrub, or because there's a reason for removing them. And then when they needed to move it back on the national network again, they probably would have bolted them back on. But I think that's post use at Sunderland South Dock. So that's when they withdrew it from the traffic and towed it away. And I don't know where it ended up. They painted the working instructions out, because I think on the side it said something like to work the Sunderland South branch only.
Right.
Or to work Sunderland South Dock branch only.
My gut, given the age of it, that it's, they started doing these, splitting them then, made me wonder whether this used to be one of the old ones that was used on the Denbigh trains.
It could be, but I thought they'd been specially converted to Sunderland.
Because they used to, the ones that had MGI use would have it written on there.
Yes, but there's definitely, it definitely said to work the Sunderland South Dock branch only or something. And also where the little black bit on the bottom is where it's coded ZTR, because it was for propelling moves and it was limited and it was restricted to the dock branch. That actually transferred it to the engineers fleet. So it was classed as a runner rather than a brake van, or a propelling vehicle rather than a brake van. So it was a ZTR, not a CAR or a CTR, I suppose it would have been. But again, when they took it away for scrapping or transfer somewhere else, they had to recode it. So they bolted the lamp irons back on and painted out ZTR and painted CAR on the side in what looks like a 2-inch paintbrush. I've done it with Model Masters letters off a very old SMS sheet from the 1980s or whatever. Wow, which looks slightly fuzzy, but on the real thing, it's actually been done with a paintbrush. You can see where he's just gone C-A-R.
Yeah.
And probably painted the lamp irons at the same time, because you can see the lamp iron is actually black at this end, and they've painted the end of it white. So I suspect it's not black. I suspect it's just bare metal, and they've bolted it back on for transit. But yeah, that was an interesting one. I've no idea why I did it. It just looked really interesting. And that's one of the ones where the pipes come up over the platform and the air tank's on the outside. And you can just see the brake valve poking up off the end of the veranda.
Oh.
If you go back to the previous picture again, that's faded rail freight colours. And those are both colours out of Games Workshop. So I can't remember what they are, but they're both Games Workshop colours to give that faded effect. So if you go onto the vans, it's the same thing. If you look at them, they're not the same colour.
Yeah, this one's
that's deliberate. That's not the camera or the lighting. One of them is a different colour. So one of those is squig orange. So I think that's the one on the right. And the one on the left is Wild Rider red.
Ah, yes.
Now, both of those colours aren't rail freight red, but they are both quite close to slightly faded rail freight red. And squig orange is obviously slightly more faded than Wild Rider red. I'm not quite sure why they call it squig orange, because it's not orange. It's got a sort of orangey tint in that photo, but in real life, it's definitely not orange.
Yeah. Now, I did. I've done some, although I've only got one finished in that colour, but I've got 5. Oh, damn! I just made it small. This is one of mine, and I did that salt weathering technique on it.
Yeah, so you've got that patchy.
Yeah, so what I did was I started off because the pink stuff doesn't really go as patchy as the stuff on the grey, I noticed. So when I painted the red on, I just got rail red, added a bit of pale grey to it to bleach it out, and then just spray it on like that. But for the lower grey, I started off with sort of like I got two shades of grey. I went with a lightish one, like sort of almost like a rail grey and a flint grey, and a kind of did like spirals. Again, as I said before, just keep the airbrush moving. You keep the airbrush moving all the time, then you're not going to get the same color on there. So that would just show the tonality of the layers of paint effectively. And then what I did was I got some salt and water. It's something I got from aircraft modelers. And I made like a toothpaste kind of texture. So you just pick it up with your paintbrush and you stick it on, all the bits where you want it to come off. And then when that's dry, stick it, airbrush it. The charcoal, which is the proper color for it, but the departmental grey, rail freight grey. So I painted the whole thing with it, and then when that was dry, I just give it a scrub on the under the tap with the toothbrush, and it took off all the layers of paint on the top.
Yeah, it's a really good technique for doing that. It's great for rusty finishes as well on rusty wagons. I tend to go the other way around and build the colour up, but actually, if you can find a really good rust colour, and then salt wash the wagon, and then spray your top coat over the top, so it can be, for unfitted wagons, it can be rail grey. For fitted wagons, it can be freight brown, and then attack it with a toothbrush. You actually get big rusty patches appearing all over it.
I haven't.
Now do a chipping fluid that does the same thing. You can spray chipping fluid on and do it with a toothbrush. It has the same effect.
Yeah, I've got an idea for something, but I haven't actually. It's one of those. It's a conceptual idea, but I haven't actually tried it yet. But I have a feeling it might work out well, and that would be the Games Workshop. They do the textured paints.
Yes.
Similar, but not the same thing. What I'm thinking is, if I took some weathering powder and mixed it in with paint, so use some dark bits and rusty bits, and basically, if you can imagine, that is the rust that's underneath the paint, and then what happens is the saltwater technique over the top of it will take that off,
and then give it a good scrub and bring it through.
Yeah, I think that could work. Like I say, I haven't tried it. It's a conceptual thing, and I'm going to try it one day.
Yeah. It would definitely. I think it could work if you use fine enough pigments. If you use the Cars stuff, they're ground pastels. Basically, you can do this yourself at home, people, by buying some pastel paints in the works and grinding them up.
Scraping it up was just scraping it off with a knife.
Yeah, or just drop it in a pestle and smash it with a. Drop it in your pestle and bash it with your mortar. It's the same thing. Yeah, you get a really fine pigment. They're just ground up pastels. Yeah, you can do the same thing, or you can just go out buy the Carl's weathering powders, which, although they're in a Ziploc plastic bag, do get absolutely everywhere, as I found.
Now, I wonder what it is you've. What is it you actually put it on? I mean, it does look like it's the hob of the cooker.
That's my ceramic hob.
Right, because the only reason I would see it is maybe that bit there.
You can see in some of my photos, you can actually see the manufacturer's name. You don't realise because it's all flat and shiny.
Yeah.
But if you look carefully, you can see the manufacturer's name sometimes. And that is not rail freight grey. That is probably Dawnstone, which is another Games Workshop colour, which is very nearly rail freight grey for the same reason. So it's slightly faded.
Yeah.
It's interesting as well with VEAs. It depends on whether they were originally painted that colour and which batch they were, as to whether the buffer beams are red or black.
Yeah, and also
some black and the bottom rail is always grey. But the first 50 were freight maroon, and then when they got repainted, it depended where they were repainted. So some of them came out with red buffer beams, and some of them came out with black. But some of the later batches also had black buffer beams. So you've really got to look at your pictures to match the numbers that come on the transfer sheets with the actual colour of the van. Because I made that mistake of thinking they were all red, and they're not.
Yeah, there's also the height is different as well. Let me
Yes, the red stripe can be different heights.
Yeah,
and
I
that
know.
tends to show a repaint rather than a batch difference, I think. I think originally they were all the same height because they had a spec sheet for it.
Yeah.
But when they repainted them, some of them would have, they had much deeper red stripes.
VEA.
Red stripe.
I'm so organised with my stuff.
Disturbingly so.
Yeah. Let's see if I can.
So your third row down, actually, the next row, those two, I think they're different heights. The one, that one, and then the one a couple of pictures along.
No, the same. You can see the distance.
Oh, but they've got different size rail freights.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There's one.
Yep, there's one, and then the one next to it's deeper.
Next to it, yeah.
So that would suggest that the one nearest you, and also the one nearest you's got a black buffer beam.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably one of the early freight maroon ones that's been repainted.
Yeah.
Because at that stage, they probably would have specified a standard thickness for the red stripe, as opposed to a red stripe that suited the vehicle.
There's that thing I was talking about, maybe doing the salt watering technique over weathering powders and paint.
You've got those big, dirty, rusty patches on the end, but they're kind of distinct lumps.
Mm. So, I mean, there's your pink.
That is pink horrors. I wouldn't dare paint a wagon that colour, but that is pink horrors.
Mm.
In fact, now I've seen that, I might have to buy another one to do it. Just go, no, that's the real colour. Here's a picture.
I've got 6 that I've painted, 2 which are deckled and painted. The other ones are in sort of two-tone grey and red, like this. But I must admit I am tempted by that. I mean, that's one that's been sat in the sun for a long time.
Yeah, well, the 92. That's weeks away from being transferred to the engineers.
Yeah. And the reason why they use these short wheelbase fans was because the MOD terminals had really tight corners in many places.
It's actually Glasgow. Is that how you pronounce it? Because it's Welsh, isn't it? Is it Glasgow? Glasgow. That is one of the places where the curvature on the sidings is so tight that they had to use those vans.
Mm.
It's a Royal Ordnance factory. It's actually an ammunition factory.
Right.
Let's not talk about ordnance because we don't make guns anymore. It's an ammunition factory. And Glasgow was. There's also, it might have been Devonport, was another place where they would be moving ammunition for the warships, but the dock lines were so tight they couldn't use long wheelbase vans.
Yeah.
So of course, again, they got rid of these vans because they moved to those little 10-foot containers with the side opening doors.
Yeah, one of the things that I did with my ones of these was when I was doing it, these were hard to get. You couldn't get them, for love nor money.
That's low inside look.
Yeah, and and I've got a pack of them, but I didn't want to waste them, because what will happen is they'll change what's in it and they'll just rip off the sticker and stick another one on top of it or somewhere else.
Yeah, it depends. It depends what they've put in it as well. So if it's small arms, and because they would obviously, because they were going to an ordnance factory to pick up ammunition, they could have any. So the 1-1 and the 1-2 applies to different sorts of ammunition. Mm-hmm. So I think 1-1 is small arms rounds. Yeah. So you're 7.62 or back in those days it would be 7.62. These days it's 5.56. Ammunition would be, I think, 1-1. So it's not likely to cause a major explosive hazard if there's a fire, because it will just cook off inside the van and go pop, 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 pop.
Yeah.
Whereas 1-2, I think, is mortar rounds, and they have a blast effect. So if there's a fire in a wooden van, you want to run away from those because they can blow the sides of the van off and cause shrapnel. And I think
I'm just having this weird little
as well, which is like, don't even go near these.
I just had this weird, bizarre thought in my head. Do you remember 6008? Was it 081, which was the GWR painted one?
Oh yeah, threw a leg out of bed, didn't it?
Leg out of bed, blew the door off, and there's a big dent in the side of it where it rattled around. Where the piston basically flew out of the crankcase and just smashed all over the place. And I just sort of had this bizarre idea of, it cooked off, and you got these little dents from the inside where the bullets just like. So, but yeah, so what I did with these was, you can see how this one there, I'm going to ripped off the sort of side bits and they haven't bothered with the middle bit. Well, what I've done is on the opposite side of it, I've got the two red bits there, and then the middle bit's missing. So I've basically just zigzagged across the transfer, stuck one side
so
on
you
one side,
basically doubled up your transfers.
yeah, and then just use a bit of white paint to sort of, make it look like it's still got the bit, the stuff that you can only get off.
The grey is the glue. So they're lick and stick. They're self-adhesive. You're supposed to. I think they dunk them in a bucket because they're too big to lick, but they're like stamps. So you basically slap it on the side.
Oh, I thought it was like
I think they waft it in a bucket and.
Oh, right.
No, they don't. They don't use a. They don't do. No, it's the army. They don't have time for that. That would be too neat. They just literally stick it in a bucket and go whack on the side. But of course, the glue's quite long lasting. So when they try and rip it off, it's like a pre-glued poster.
Oh, right. Okay.
The paper comes off, but it leaves the backing, and that's mostly glue. So it just starts to pick up dirt. It's like, it's like wood glue or something. So it's actually almost clear, but it'll start to pick the dirt up, and it will just go grey as it cooks in the sun.
I did have several pictures of them.
Attempted.
Oh, it's actually it's the end one here that shows it exactly what I did. So that's one side, and that's the other side.
Yeah.
So
there's your transfer, and then turn
very,
it over.
Very simple thing to do, and it saved a transfer.
How did you cut them, or did you just basically did you kind of hold one corner of the transfer down and just pull it?
No, I just got my modelling scalpel and just sort of went.
Oh, right. You actually cut it, because I'd have just kind of put a paintbrush on one of the transfer and stretch it until it snapped.
Yeah. No, it just seemed more precise to just get a sharp modelling scalpel and just stick my finger on it and just zigzag off it across it. You sort of go like that and then tilt the blade and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I just put a paintbrush on one corner and dragged it until it broke.
Was it this you were oohing at?
No, it was the turbot side with the.
Yes, this was something that I tinkered around with a few years back.
Oh, is that tin foil?
Yeah.
Oh, that's clever.
So
it saves an awful lot of grief, because the way they used to say was you basically dunked a 60-watt light bulb behind your model until it got soft, and then stabbed a knife in it. And
then what happened is the top went down.
Well, yeah, it looked like a sag. All your plastic would sag and melt.
Yeah.
Whereas that actually.
What I figured out,
you're building something up.
Yeah, when you find pictures of turbot, you often find that they've either bulged like this, where they've got some heavy spoil in there and it's all wet and it's all just, and they're going to put more on top of it, and it just gets, and just over time it just stretches the metal. A lot like stone hoppers get like that as well. Barbell. Prime example.
You can see the sides bulge.
Yeah, and I've got 14 of those that I want to do. So I'm thinking about doing that, but it's a bit harder with that because you haven't got these nice sort of closed framed edges. And so all I did was this was just an experiment on an old wagon that I'd broken and really needed to replace. So other ones you'll get, and in fact, let me find a proper picture of one, because
those digs are from the mechanical diggers. So they bucket load. Even in the 80s, they would bucket load these. Yeah. So there'll be a road railer or a tracked machine next to it, and it'd just scoop a load of stuff up, dump it in the wagon, and as he came back out, he'd go clang on the side.
I've seen similar examples on I can't remember what it was now, but at Guy Bridge, and they used a forklift truck, and then they would go on, and the forks would be sticking out over the end and dunk the side, the opposite side. So
so they just dunk into the back of it.
Opens, evaporate, turbot. So let's. Come on. It always takes a couple of moments for the computer to say, where is it? Oh, There we go. So those ones are a little bit deflected, not really showing much. That one's very dented. But there we go. I mean, even here you can see it's just got a few little dents, and you can see it's a bit bulged.
Yeah, and the whole that's actually the whole door.
Yeah. Let's see. That's pretty fresh. You can see there's one where it really has bulged.
Yeah. And that's really that's really difficult to do in plastic. If you've got if it's a brass kit, that's really easy to do.
Yeah.
And of course you can do it accidentally with brass kits, and then it never looks right.
Mm.
Hang on, it's getting a bit dark. Yeah, that's a good one. So it's got the little dinks and dents.
Yeah, and this is 1984. They were done in 1980, if I remember correctly.
82. They started in 82, but they were still churning them out in 1985. Right. So actually, they were still building new ones, and that's what was looking pretty ropey.
It was the 980 series sea cows or sea lions that I was thinking of. The welded ones rather than the riveted ones.
Yeah, the 81 build.
Yeah. But you can see how it, like I say, it's got these dented bits. And I was just sort of like, had this bit of I had this bit of wagon that wasn't very good anymore. And it's like, how do I make it look more realistic in that kind of, like I say, you can see how it's got the, it's bulged in places and dented in other bits. And, I just thought, so how could I do that? I'm trying to find one that look. There you go. That's a good bulged looking one.
Yeah, you can actually see the middle of the panels bulged, but the top rail's still quite straight.
Mm. So it just, made me think. I think. Oh gosh, I mean, look at that. 1999.
But there we go. So we're into EWS days now. It's like, well, it's not my wagon. I don't care.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me, my phone is ringing.
Hello?
Hello.
But yeah, so we got
okay.
there we go. Just muted Mark for a while. But yeah, so like I say, you can see how it's all. I mean, look how dented and buckled that is. This is a Boness, as the picture. But how could I replicate that? And so what I decided to do was to experiment. And so this is some tin foil, and I've just taken some slithers of plastic card. Oh, there we go.
I should have it in my pocket and turn it off, but it was sitting over there ringing away. It would just ring and ring and ring until I answer it.
Yeah. I was just saying, so how am I going to replicate this? So I decided to have a little experiment and see what I could do. And so I made one a kind of square bulge, and the other one's more sort of, oval shaped. And then another one has just got some like slithers of plastic card, just cut some bits off, match them up a little bit, and then just glued them on, and then put some tin foil the right size, bit of super glue around the edges, push it on with a cocktail stick or I can't remember what it was I used now. Might have been a file. And then just paint it up and see how it looks. And I think they come out quite nice.
Yeah,
quite bad.
They come out pretty good. And also, of course, picking the top edge out in rust. So you've got the dent, and then where the paint's actually cracked, you've got a little line of rust. Actually makes it.
Yeah. So I'd like to do Rake 10 in the end, but it's one of those things that's on the to-do list. Do I want to spend a lot of money? I mean, they're only 20 quid each, I suppose, but when you got 10, that's £200 to find. Or do I just buy the old Cambrian kit, which I always thought was very good, which is what these are.
It's okay, but the mold's wearing a bit, so the underframe's getting a little bit lumpy.
Yeah.
When the one-piece bogey, I mean, now he's moved to one-piece bogies. They're really good because it means because the problem with the old kit was, firstly, the brown plastic was quite brittle, and secondly, you had a 3-part bogey frame, and it just always fell apart. because the plastic just didn't like glue. It would, after a while, it would just go brittle and just fall apart. Now it's a one-piece bogie moulding. Actually, they're a lot easier to build. But yeah, now the rest of the moulds are getting a bit worn.
Funnily enough, that's the reason why this became a spare wagon, because it fell apart on me.
Yeah.
I think I put something in it, and the wheels just went. Whoop,
yeah, it's exactly what happened to mine, which is why they got retired somewhere. We rebuilt them.
Yeah. Anyway, let's continue on, because
there you go. Electrification van. It actually says so. It says GN sub electrification. So that's the Great Northern Suburban electrification, which is the 317s.
Yeah,
and that's a post. So that would have been built unfitted, unpiped, and it got a vacuum pipe fitted to it, which is basically gas pipe routed around the outside of the outside of the underframe. It is. It's like it's 2 or 3 inch gas pipe. You can actually. It's got knuckle joints either end. And it's just standard gas fittings to move the vacuum pipe because they'd filled they'd filled all the voids in the underframe up with concrete. When they wanted to put a pipe in it, they couldn't. So the pipe runs along the bottom of the underframe and then comes out under the edge of it, up the side, and then into the body above all the timber work. And then it'll go up the side to the brake valve and the gauge or on the wall just inside the door.
Yeah, let's jump to the next one.
That's now that's another Bolster C. Except BR, I mean, anybody who's familiar with sort of 80s, 90s, and even up to today knows that the Bolster Ds were air braked as the BDA wagons. So and BR did about 1,500 of them or something, and they were converted in the 1970s onwards, so about 77 onwards. I think it was done at Ashford. What most people don't know is that before they did the BDAs, they actually air braked 2 Bolster Cs as BCAs, and they did 2, and then decided that they didn't need wagons that short for anything, that they were going to do the Bolster Ds because they were longer and therefore a bit more versatile. So these 2 wagons were almost immediately transferred to the civil engineer.
Let's just move that out. Sorry, I'm moving out of the way.
So these 2 wagons were almost immediately moved to the civil engineer, firstly with the bolsters on, and then after a while they took the bolsters off and used them as bogie carriers. And it's quite interesting because they not only did they air brake them, but they had Davis and Lloyd cast bogies, so they were on quite good bogie frames anyway. They had a good ride. They actually replaced them with Y27Cs.
Yeah.
So they're Y27s. So they're fabricated Y27s as opposed to the Y27Cs, which are the cast ones, which have got the sort of oval holes in them. So these are basically a squashed Y25. So it's a fabricated bogie, but the bogie actually stops at the suspension units. It doesn't continue round the end of the bogie, which is why they used it. And I think it's the first use of a Y27. And I think some private owner wagons have got fabricated Y27s under them. I think it might be the Peak Forest Hoppers might have them.
Yeah.
Somebody's uses them, but I think those are the only Y27 fabricated bogies on BR wagons on these 2. So it's 96. It was 960000 and 960001.
Right.
The other thing is when they put a changeover lever on it for the air braking for empty loaded, and it's absolutely enormous. It's about a foot long.
Yeah.
I've no idea why, because bigger wagons have got changeover levers that are like the size of your thumb. You know, it's just huge, and it's got a great big like gear knob on the top of it as well.
Right.
It's just weird. And that's roughly where the brake lever used to be on the Dean Churchwood gear, but not quite. It's just off the centre line. But yeah, that's a Bachmann Bolster C,
right.
Heavily butchered. So it's got those are Cambrian bogies, but again, I've butchered them to turn them into Y27s. It's got oleo buffers. It's got air brake gear under it. Now you can actually see some of the brake rigging as well.
I did version. I did this for Rail Express magazine some years ago, which
that's a Bolster D.
Which are ex-VDA van chassis. You know, because sometimes the load was too long.
Well, that's the thing. Why did BR use these for carrying rails when they had salmon wagons, which
And bow
are
rail.
62 feet long, and bow rails, which are 62 feet long. Why did they
Sturgeon.
insist on using bolster Ds, which are only 50 foot long?
And sturgeon.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
sturgeon were. Yeah, I think they used to put track panels on sturgeon sometimes.
The
But,
one thing that
salmon wagons are the right length. Why use these? Because you've got to. You basically you have to use runners, and that loses almost. Well, that's probably 1.5 SLUs or something. You're losing in every set of wagons.
Yeah.
Whereas if you use, that's probably the same length as a pair of salmon wagons, and it's probably got slightly lower capacity, so you could get more rail in less space.
Yeah.
I don't know why they did this, unless they're moving them, unless the engineer was paranoid about axle loading.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it could just be that that's what they had. That's what they were given.
Well, yeah, we were talking about this the other way, weren't we? I suspect that you're right. That that it is that they got given loads of bolster Ds and they just went, "Oh, okay, thanks."
The one thing,
free trains.
the main thing I learned from this project was that I'm going to get myself a big sheet of just civil engineers transfers done, because cutting, I've got a tub full of different sizes and different types of vans and all sorts of different wagons, and I've got numbers as well. And so when you can see they're a little bit wonky, 209.54, but when you realize that they're a millimeter tall, I don't think that's
not
too
a surprise,
bad.
is it? Something I was told a long time ago was if you turn the wagon upside down to letter it, apparently it's easier to get the numbers straight if they're upside down. I don't know if that's true or not. I have tried it and it does seem to work.
Yeah,
but that might just be like old wives' tale. But I was told years ago if you turn it upside down, it's easier to get the numbers straight. I don't know how that works, but there you go.
If I recall correctly, this had ZAA, and I cut out.
Cut it.
In 3 pieces just to
the
be
good
able to
news
get
is, I know it's a pain because they're individual, but Railtech do individual letters in 3, 4, and 5 inch. Well, actually, they do it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 inch. But you get a sheet of 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 5, and 6. So you can actually get all the letters. What he does though is he just prints an alphabet. So you get A to Z about 6 times, but you don't get like loads of A's and E's and V's and A.
Excuse me, there's my phone this time. You keep talking.
So the other thing to point out, of course, is this is clearly a Bachmann wagon because it's got that god-awful axle box on it, which bears no relation to anything that's ever been on a wagon.
Yeah.
It's an awful thing. If you can talk to Matt Chivers and get the bits out of the Chivers 21-ton mineral wagon, they do some really nice roller bearing axle boxes in both the hooded style and the open style.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, since I did this, I mean, this is, what was it, May 2012? It was a long time ago, and I've changed a bit, since then. Like I say, the main thing I learned though is that it took me a day to put the transfers on 3 wagons.
Yeah, I think John Talbot still sell. Well, John Talbot will still sell you his transfer sheets if he's got them in stock, and I think he does breams and runner wagons on a sheet. So you get enough transfers on a sheet to do 6 wagons.
Yeah, one of
I can't remember what number it is. It'll be a 4mm transfer, probably in the 40s or the 50s in his catalogue. He's more local to you than he is to me.
Another thing I learned from doing these wagons. So previously, I did a bow rail. There you go. I've relabeled it because that had my former guy name. I did this, but I did it with Code 100 rail.
Yeah, huge.
And then I went, and did the later one. The 3-piece, like I showed you a moment ago. And it's like, it actually does look better with the small rail on. So I've redone it since. But what you can just see how it kind of, I had problems with the load shifting and moving because I'd take it to show, stick it in because it's not like you have a box that you can put it in properly because it's a kit. So I'd put it in a box with a lot of tissue paper around it, and eventually, over time, the load, because it was super glued on, and super glue is brittle, so it snapped off eventually, and sort of
it's got
started
no
rattling
shear
around.
strength, so any
Yeah.
shock will cause it to come apart.
So, learn from that lesson. I applied to this. You can just about see it if you know where to look. You can just see it drops down a little bit there. That's because I got a piece of brass and soldered it right the way across. So the entire rail load is one solid piece of structure.
Yeah, which makes it easier to. The other trick is to glue it to the bolsters with impact adhesive.
Mm.
So the red stuff, not copy decks. Can't remember the name of it, but you buy it in DIY sheds and Dias. It's an impact adhesive, so it's rubber based.
Right.
It doesn't like plastic, but it's okay on paint. So if you wipe it on the rail, and the trick is to leave it to dry. So it's not like plastic glue. You don't paint it on and stick it together because it's still liquid, and then it'll eat its way into the plastic.
Yeah.
What you do is you put it on the rail, let it dry, and then when it's gone dry, you press it down, and it actually becomes very stuck. And it's because it's rubber based, there's a little bit of give in it all the time.
Right.
So it won't part company. Well, it'll part company after 20 years because it eventually loses all its elasticity. But by then, who cares?
Well, crikey, there you go. Paul Harrison in the live chat. Hello, Paul. How you doing? You see at the bottom there?
I can't. It's all too small for me.
All right. It says hi, Laura and Mark. Hi there.
Okay.
But anyway, so let's get on with yours. So, this is a nice one.
Oh, now here we go. So,
Western LNER. I can't remember what you call them.
It's an ADB. Yeah, it's an ADB. It might have been an LNER 13-ton all steel open, but it might have been a BR built. You don't know because the ADB number is new.
Yeah.
But it's air braked, not air piped. And the reason it's air braked is that in the 60s, the Western region decided that they wanted to try out air braked freight trains to see if they could run them more quickly from London to Bristol or Bristol to London or both. And instead of picking what was going to be the future style of wagons, so long wheelbase wagons, they picked a complete random selection of whatever. I don't know how they picked it. It's like they were looking out the window in the yard and just went, whatever I can see, that's what we'll convert. So instead of picking tubes and plates, which have got quite long wheelbases and was already the direction of travel for BR, because by the time they'd done these conversions, they were already producing, or they'd already prototyped the Open AB and the Van AB, and the Hop 32 was already in production. So we already knew that longer wheelbases were going to be the thing. They picked all this weird selection of short wheelbase vans and wagons, as well as some tube wagons. They did about 5 tubes and some plates, but they picked PAL vans, 12-ton planked ventilated vans. These are wagons with a 10-foot chassis.
Right.
So you can imagine trying to fit air brake gear into them was a bit of a stretch, and they completely gutted them. So if you look at this, you can see this is actually an LNER style brake gear.
Yeah.
Which is actually quite efficient in terms of moving parts compared to the BR style or the LMS style. But even there, they actually tweaked the position of the V hangers in order to get the air brake gear to fit.
Right.
So they didn't just take the wagon and drop the brake gear off and put new brake gear on. They took the brake gear off and then they took everything else off and then they rebuilt it from scratch. Which for a wagon that could have been at that stage, at least, could potentially have been 30 years old, strikes me as really odd.
Well, I've actually got I got my old, wagon book out.
Yeah.
And there were 2 of them at the time. These were BR Shildon built. Diagram one.
So they're probably, maybe 15, 20 years old.
Built 1950.
Yeah, so that's 17 years old, I think. So they converted this around 67, I think. 60. So BR was already building air brake vehicles down at Ashford. So I'm not quite sure what this was about. This may have been about high-speed freight trains. and it may have even been because the Western was all, until probably the late 70s, the Western was always doing its own thing. So it's quite possible that they were looking at, could they convert all their existing wagon fleet rather than getting new wagons in? Again, God alone knows why. Why would you do this? But they converted all these wagons and they ran the test trains. They had 37s dragging them up and down the main line, running within proper freight trains. I think speeds of up to 90 miles an hour, which must be terrifying for a wagon with a wheelbase this short.
I'd hate to be the guy on the brake van at the back.
I think the idea was I think that was like a maximum speed test, and it was under test conditions, so they probably were loaded with weights rather than real goods.
Yeah.
I think the idea was to get freights up to 60, which
what
in
year
the 1960s was just unbelievably fast.
What year do you think this is? Converted?
Sorry? Around about I'd say I think it was about 1967 they did these conversions.
Right. The only reason I think what popped through my head as you were saying that is, do you remember DP2? Sorry, not DP2. Wait a minute, was it? Yeah, DP2. The class 50 in a class
Delta,
55.
a Delta, the Delta with a 50 in it.
Yeah, and it basically crashed into the back of a cement train, and the reason why the cement train, and because it was caused by hunting, and I just wonder maybe maybe
the Western actually, the SAAs, so the 2-axle steel bolsters, they're based on, it's a standard 20'9" chassis, so it's the same chassis as the OAAs, VAAs, VBAs, all of them. They've all got 20'9" chassis. Mm-hmm. The SAAs, because of the way they were loaded, it was I think they had a higher gross vehicle weight than the vans and the opens by a bit. They weren't 30 tons; they were like 35 or something, because they were steel wagons. So they're like the SPA was a plate wagon, and I don't know why the SAAs particularly did this, but they suffered from cyclic top, which is a peculiarity of 4-axle wagons. So as they're running along the track, obviously the suspension's bouncing. As they run along jointed track, at a certain speed, they go and then come and they just come off and they run alongside the track for a while until they hit something like a signal post or a set of points, and then they turn over. And the SAAs were in use in South Wales from the early 70s for not very many years, until they discovered that the whole fleet suffered from cyclic top.
Right.
And I think it was to do with the springs. So they had standard leaf springs on them. And this was before Brunninghouse springs were fitted to other wagons. But you'll notice there was this kind of mass change of springing, and that's when BR started putting out all these experimental springing sets. Actually, if you talk to Kit Spackman, he was involved in that. All those high-speed freight vehicle experiments. So they had all sorts of interesting springing arrangements to try and stop the wagons bouncing off the track. But it was a peculiarity of short wheelbase wagons and 2-axle wagons. So why the SAAs did it, no one really knows. But basically, if they hit a certain speed on the Great Western Main Line in South Wales, they just all jumped off the track, and they withdrew the whole fleet from steel traffic and went over to bolster wagons. They went over to bogie wagons, like almost overnight. So the SAAs they stripped the bodies off and turned them into the FPA container wagons. It's an OAA chassis, but they're all SPAs. They're SAAs, and loads of runner wagons are SAAs. Rather than, I know there's quite a few VDA vans, but nearly all runner wagons in the 80s were ex-SAAs, because they couldn't use them in traffic because they just bounced off the track.
Yeah, because they
started fitting Brunninghouse springs on things, because even the OAAs I think were built with leaf springs, and they were resprung, and that seemed to cure it. It stopped the wagon bouncing up and down. But that was the cheap solution. The expensive solution is like taper light.
Yeah, because they were the 400,
but it costs a fortune.
Yeah, the SAAs were the 400 series ones like these.
Yes, so a lot of those were turned into RRAs. The ones that weren't turned into FPAs. The entire FPA fleet is ex-SAA.
And there are a few like this one which have still got the original.
Yeah, they've got the bolsters and they've still got the hinge on the end. And I've got a picture. Well, the two that I modelled, one of them's actually still got the ends, but they're just turned down flat.
Right.
And they had turnover bolsters in the floor as well. They weren't built with. They weren't like BDAs with a separate bolster. You actually just grabbed hold of a bit of strapping, flip the timber over, and to make the bolsters.
I never knew that.
But yeah, those fold up, whatever they are, stanchions on the side. It's quite unusual to see them, but quite a few of them were still running. But you can see it's leaf sprung. So although it's got double link suspension, it's leaf springs.
Yeah.
That's another reason that HAAs were limited to 45 miles an hour. Because if they went too quick.
Yeah. There's one of the types that I want to do, because I want to have a rake of. I've got 10 BDAs, and I want to have with over length loads again.
Yeah. So you need a lot of runners.
Yeah, I need 11. Well, one of the types that I want to do are these ones, which are the OBA type ones.
Yeah, with that weird.
And some of them had planks on them.
Rail.
Yeah, but a lot of them were like this.
Yeah, which is basically to stop idiot staff falling through the holes.
Yeah, because they removed the decking and they removed the ends. And I've got a picture here of one which is you can see right the way through it.
You should have a legs. They seem to be able to do a mesh floor very nicely.
Yeah. Well, so I was like, okay, well, how can I do one of these? You know, because if you can see through it, well, that'd be great. But the problem is, where'd you put the weight? Because, you know, if you have a wagon that's got no weights in it, then it's just going to fall off the track. So I had two ideas. One is to make a 3D printed chassis and have, you know, so you actually have a see-through chassis. And in the just have a small channel which you can drop some liquid lead in there. Just waiting for the crashing and banging.
Sorry.
That's okay. Anyway, so you know, to have some liquid lead in there, that would give it a bit of weight. But I have the way that I'm looking to do things now is to have sort of a multi-etch part. So it would have the end pieces just, you know, with some folds in them so you can get the right shape there. Take the Beckman model, and then for the decking have a double etch thing. So for those people who don't know how etching is done, what happens is when you do your drawing, you have something that'll be white and something black and something red or something like that. So anything that's white will be the full thickness. So let's say, just to make random number, it's 1 millimeter thick. I'm just going to mute you for a moment, Mark. So if you can imagine, you've got, let me turn the sharing screen off. So if we can imagine, you know, that we've got full etch would be 1 millimeter thick and half etch would be 0.5 millimeter thick. So when you do your drawing, you have white, which is, you know, the framework. The bottom will be full etch. So if you can imagine the framework on the solid top piece, and then you can then just scrape everything off the Beckman model except for the chassis part. You can leave, you know, you can put weight underneath it because you won't be able to see all the way through it. So what will happen is you'll have, if you can imagine, you paint the full etch grey, and you know, spray with the matte black first, so there's no shine and anything inside. So then, so the inside would be black. The top of the framework would be executive dark grey or something of that nature. And then that would just sit on the top of the deck, and underneath you can just put liquid lead to give it your weight. And then you just put a mesh over the top and just dry brush it rust. And I think that would be a good way to effectively, it's sleight of eye. You know, think of it a bit like the conjurers and they use sleight of hand to hide something. It's sleight of eye. From, when you're looking vertically on it, yes, you can see through it. But when you're looking at it from, even this, you can't see through it very well. But you can see the framework look of it. But if you're seeing it from, sort of the normal kind of plate you might see, something like this, then, you can see the framework. You can see the mesh of it, so you've got, a deck that's everything's been shaved off. You don't even need the body. So just a flat bottom, stick the side edge pieces on, fold them up so they're going the right way, and then a mesh etch over the top, dry brush, piece of cake. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good idea.
So, how about this one?
Sorry. It's a custom mix of. It's an engineer's olive, but it's not actually engineer's olive out of a jar. It's a dark green and a black acrylic paint mixed.
Oh yeah.
Because again, as I say, I brush paint nearly everything now. The yellow is the same mix that I use on the other wagons, but that's it's a Bachmann van, but they put an enormous weight inside it, which fills up half the veranda. So inside the ends, I've had to take the weight out and put some planking in. But it's all that. It's a propelling van, I think. So the ends are actually yellow.
Yeah,
because it's a propelling van from somewhere down on the southern Dover, I think. But you'll see it's another mechanical engineer's. It's another rolling stock engineer's vehicle. So I'm working my way through a southern fleet. So that's an electrification van. So I did them both at the same time. So the greens are almost the same. But that's an old southern van, which the electrification fleet had real hand-me-down stuff. So that is a proper Southern Railway van. They also had some proper northeastern vans.
Yeah.
Horsham.
Is that the old Cambrian kit or
yes? Because you can't do that from the Bachmann model. I don't think.
Right.
You might be. Well, you might do actually. They might do a right-hand one.
Yeah.
But no, that's a Cambrian kit.
Yeah, I've got one that I'm. I've got
thin and fine.
Yeah, I've got one of the Bachmann ones, but I'm doing it with the plywood side. So I basically drilled out and cut out all the framework in the middle, and I just need to put a new piece of plastic card in there to make it look like it's a plywood.
Yeah, they actually it's not very thick. They actually nailed it over the top. So they didn't take all the timber out and put plywood in. I think they actually just nailed the plywood over the top.
The problem is that if I put anything at the top, it's going to sit too high, or be too see-through. So it's just
certainly with the Cambrian kit, because it's actually got the right depth. The Bachmann models, the framing's really thick, so you can actually just put some super glue, some 10 thou on, and it works fine.
All right, okay. I'm too late. I've already cut holes in it. I haven't got around to finishing it.
Fair enough.
Now,
you should see the different shades, because I basically painted them all at slightly different times, but they're all slightly different mixes of green. So the engineer's olive is another one of those colours that isn't always very green. It starts off very dark, but it fades really quickly.
Yeah, I do like the this one's very dark, isn't it? This one's kind of pale.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Isn't that the oh gosh, was it an Airfix or?
No, that's Hornby Double.
Double O, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, the frame is Hornby Double. So it's a little bit too long. You kind of see it in the picture. It's a little bit too long at the ends, because the original the toy had huge couplings on the end of it, and it had to and they kept the length right by putting tiny buffers on it. So when you put the right length, when you put proper buffers on it, it looks a bit too long. I didn't realise that until I'd finished it and I measured it. So it's a little bit too long at the ends, but that is actually engineer's olive out of the round hatch jar.
Right.
Again, those are the end two are brush painted with a mix of that's not engineer's olive out of the jar. That is whatever I mixed up, and you can see it's not a lot of difference. But this is kind of this is the shades of green. They're just mixed from a dark green and a black until it looks right. Sometimes I'll chuck a bit of brown into the mix.
Yeah. Yeah, because it just tones them down again, doesn't it? It bleaches them
Yeah.
out a little bit,
I think if we go through, and then that is a faded olive drab colour, which I think is life colour. It's because that is actually the colour that wagon went, because they bleach in the sun, and they depends if they're metal or wood, they start to bleach out and they go brown. So if they're timber, they will actually go brown. If they're metal, they kind of go a very weird green shade.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned olive drab, because as someone who's interested in aircraft, there's a lot of old American World War II stuff that would be olive drab. And olive drab is an interesting one because, when you think of it, people think, well, what colors? If you were mixing paint to make olive drab, what would you use? And of course, most people want to say green.
No,
but
it's black and brown, I think, isn't it?
It's black and yellow.
Black and yellow.
And so, I sort of have a little silly joke from some years ago. It was probably about 10 years ago now. I went down to not really, so I went down to Ipswich for a little gathering, and this was in when was it? 2010, so January 2010. And unfortunately, that time of year, it was a little bit too cold. And so the trains were all filthy because at night it would go below freezing. And so they couldn't use the carriage washer. And I don't know, maybe they're too lazy to, get a scrubbing brush and just, that kind of thing, or do it during the day or something. But either way, the trains seem to just get dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. Has anyone been on a multiple unit where the windows are there's more dirt on them so you can barely see out?
Yeah.
So so there was, I was at Ipswich, about to head home, and I saw a 153, and there was so much dirt on the end, it could positively be described as olive drab.
Yeah.
Because it was yellow with filth on it.
Yeah, so it actually looks green.
Yeah, so just olive drab. It looks like someone tried to clean the number on it, so at least they could find out which one it was. But other than that, it was just filthy. Really, really filthy. But silly, funny little story. But I must admit, I do like that
rec tank. That's the Genesis Kits rec tank, but the bogies are Stenson models ones, because the things you get in Genesis, they're made out of pewter, so they don't bear any weight. So the weight of a wagon will actually cause the bogies to bend outwards, unless you solder wire between the frames, but then you can't get the wheels in.
Mm-hmm.
So they're brass and white metal bogie frames underneath them, but it's a bugger to do. When you get it, the floor is flat, so it's a flat casting, and the ends of the side frames are actually the wrong profile, and you can't get the floor onto the frames without. It's just not a. I don't think it's a particularly well designed kit.
I've got one that I want to make myself because I'm going to do Bristol Bath Road.
There is a 3D print. You can buy a 3D print of Shapeways, and it's expensive, but it's just so much easier than trying to do that, because it's still not right. Even though it's full of filler. There's loads of filler and bits of plastic strip to try and bring everything up to the right height and try and make everything level, because the real thing, the floor sits inside the frame. So you can imagine that the side frame's got a lip on it, basically, and all the planks are flush with the top of the side frame.
Yeah.
Whereas, it's just, the kit is a nightmare. The floor ends up sitting above the frame because it just says file it to fit. Well, you can't file it to fit because it doesn't fit in the first place. You can't adjust it. The only way you could file it to fit would be to actually throw it away and start again.
I'm fortunate.
Plastic card.
I'm kind of fortunate because a few years ago I asked if anybody had any spare brass kits or anything. They didn't want any more. Something better came out, And Alan Monk gave me, you know, a couple of bits. You know, just again, like any skill, you got to try it to use it. So I just like, anybody got a bit of scrap, something that they don't want anymore, sat in a box, never going to ever do it. And you know, it's just something so I could try some soldering on. Bit rubbish at it, but you know, I'm getting some better stuff to do, better work. You know, I think I didn't have the right solder and the right flux, that kind of thing. So you know, I was doing it out of the stuff you do, like electrical wiring and stuff. Not the right thing. But there's another one that they had. I know it's in this file, in this folder somewhere. But it had a cooler group on it.
But the other thing about the rec tank I've done is that that's the ferry rec tank, which is why it's on the Southern, because it was air piped.
Right.
Because again, with that Western Region air brake freight train, when they converted it all and tested it, they put the wagons back into. So that's another one of the air brake conversions. The van is an air brake conversion. When they'd finished with it, they put them back into ABN traffic, air brake network traffic. But of course, they're incompatible with everything else. You've got a load of 25-ton, 32-foot long vans, and then you've got this thing bouncing along on the back. And so how would you load it? How would you load it with all the other things, knowing that you've got 25 tons? Oh, except for this one where you can only put 10 tons of stuff in it.
Yeah.
So pretty soon they got moved over to civil engineering fleet, or the engineers fleet, and the Southern mechanical engineer took almost the entire air brake train wagons into departmental stock and used them for moving stuff around, because the Southern wanted to get rid of unbraked trains. So they eliminated vacuum brakes before almost everybody else, and they kind of went fully air brake before anybody else. To the extent that they shunted all their vacuum brake engineers wagons off to the Scots.
Yeah,
they
didn't
dumped them on Scotland because they still had horses and carts or something.
Yeah, and they didn't.
So an engineer got all of these wagons, and they used them obviously because they didn't do a lot of mileage. They lasted well into the 1990s. So quite a lot of these are preserved now. But the rec tank is the only ferry one. So it had an air pipe fitted when it was built. So that's why the Southern engineer took it, because it had an air pipe and they could run it in all their air brake trains.
Right.
And that's why the Southern's got this weird and wonderful collection of stuff in the engineering fleet, because they needed stuff with air pipes. And the rec tank is actually completely unfitted. Even the regular ones are YVPs. Because they're all piped. They're too small, they're too low to actually fit with vacuum braking either. They were never braked. They're always unbraked wagons, which is just terrifying. Because it's got a load capacity of about 40 tons. Can you imagine 40 tons of unbraked wagon?
Yeah. There we go. I was looking for it and I couldn't find it. There you go, with a couple of HST.
There's one next to it as well. Can you see the angle of the side frame?
Yeah.
Well, imagine the Genesis kits when you get it out of the packet, it's about half that angle.
Yeah, I can see it.
It's basically because if you look carefully at the Genesis kit, you can see that you started from a World War Run rec tank rather than the BR rec tank.
Let's try and get an angle that's roughly the same.
Yeah, but the diamond frame bogies on the World War One version, and it had turnbuckle. It had a turnbuckle underframe. It's shallower. So the World War one is shallower, but basically, I think the chap at Genesis, and I can't remember his name, has basically taken that as the master, cast it in pewter, so that there are. Although the lashing eyes are in the right place, they're a different design to the ones that are on the BR build. So it's giving you all the BR parts to stick on it, but essentially the side frame is just a copy of whoever does the, I think Ratio do the plastic kit. Yeah. And the floor's quite a nice addition. He's actually done a pretty decent job of the floor because it's completely different. It's got a huge steel casting across that's supporting the bogies, whereas the World War One, the bogie supports are underneath the frame and it's all timber on the top. So it's not bad, but yeah, pig to put together. Like most Genesis kits, there's an awful lot of fettling involved, and I've replaced a lot of bits with plastic and brass and something else.
Well, I was saying about the brass kit I was saying about. One of the other things he gave me, because it's like, okay, well, there's pretty much the whole wagon, but some bits of brake gear and stuff on this other etch that I've got spare, and it's got 2 rectangle sides on, which I think is just perfect. I mean, I just have to basically build the structure and just leave a crevice to stick the etch in there, and I've got the large part of the framework designed for me. So really,
that's if it's a brass kit, that is the World War I rectangle.
Right.
So indeed, although the shape is broadly the same in detail, almost every part is different. There's a lot more rivets on the. I mean, it's a brass kit, so you've got to punch them out. So actually, you don't have to punch them out. There's a lot more welding on the BR1, and as I say, the frame ends are more steeply sloped, and it's quite. You need a deck photo to see the shape of the metal framing, because it's an interesting sort of rounded frame part across above the bogies. It's not straight lines. It's quite an interesting shape.
And I see what you mean about it being a ferry one with the lashing eyes.
Yeah, and it's also got a little label clip which stops the bogie rotating. I suspect it won't go around anything other than radius 4.
Yeah.
On the real wagon, it's not a problem. That's actually departmental grey. I did 3 Grampus wagons, and that is actually departmental grey, but the yellow is my custom mix, so they're all slightly different shades. And they're part of a sand train. Yeah,
and I see you got a high box.
The one in the middle's got high box axle boxes, because I think the one in the middle is they're not all PC72. So Parkside do a PC15, which is the original one-brake Grampus, and a PC72, which is the later vacuum brake Grampus. What BR did was they mass converted about 1,000 of the unbrake ones to vacuum braking in the late 70s or the early 80s.
Right.
And it's a slightly different V hanger, but essentially it's the same brake gear. So they ripped everything off, because they just had 4-shoe push brakes like a Morton brake gear. They ripped all the brake gear off and fitted class brakes to it, which is quite complicated. But they obviously felt they had some life. Well, they do have some life in them, but they felt it was worth it, so they converted them to be the same style as the last ones built. The one in the middle is one of the last batches, because they had bungee cleats. The little round white dots are actually discs that are fitted to the side. They're on a spacer, like on a washer, and they're for bungee cords or rope cleats. So instead of those sort of long things that I used to fit, it's just like a round disc on a washer that you could wrap a rope round to lash a load down. I don't know why, because they never put tarpaulins on them, but they fitted them. Whereas the ones on the outside are the original PC15 sides, which is how they were built, and they're slightly different. The sides are slightly different. I think one of them's actually a Daypole ready to run. Can't remember which one it is. One of the outer 2 is actually a Daypole RTR, and it's a god awful colour when you buy it.
It's the one on the left.
Yeah, but when you it actually scrubs up all right.
I can see the finesse on that part, which it's a bit chunkier there, if that makes sense. So I think it's also that one.
The Daypole one, the V hangers are the wrong way around, and the brake lever is actually moulded as part of the V hanger, so you can't swap them round. They're the wrong way round.
Right.
It is what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm fortunate, because I kind of got. I bought some really cheap. I think I paid like £4 for about 6 of the PC15s. Plus, I've got a bunch of the more modern ones as well. I got 14 in total. The old kit is a bit of a pig to put together. It is, especially the cage underneath.
Well, the good news is on these, not all vacuum brake ones had a cage, and over time they used to knock them off or just take them off, because they never took the planks were meant to be removable, and the end dropped down so you could drive equipment along the train, but they never did it. After a while, they never did that. Why would you want to do that? So they just took the cages off, because they never took the planks out.
Right. I the way I heard it was they were to be used with ballast cleaners.
Possibly, yeah, but they were designed to drive machinery along them. because that was kind of their early mechanisation. So I'm assuming they would actually have like little bulldozers to push the ballast off, and they just basically shove it all the way down the train and take it off.
Oh my gosh!
Or they drop it down and use them. They used them to carry things. But why would you want to drive along a wagon? It's quite dangerous because those flap down things don't actually stretch. Even if you'd have to tighten the screw couplings right up and caress the buffers, because when they fold down, they don't reach the end of the wagon. So there'd always be a hole that you could fall through.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to do that. And it was a good idea, and it probably lasted about 2 weeks before I went, "This is stupid. Let's not do this."
Yeah, let's just get something else to put the bulldozer on.
Yeah,
or just open the sides and just scoop it off.
Shovel it off. Yeah,
get a JCB type of thing and just pull it towards you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think Grampus are one of those excellent examples for that. Not that many of them were civil engineers. When I say not that many, I just mean compared to the ones that weren't. So I think in the rake of 14 that I've got, maybe 3 are going to have civil engineers and look a little fresher, but the rest are just going to look tatty with I'm going to have a red one.
Golf red, quite short-lived, but very long-lasting.
Yeah, I saw. I got a photo of one many years ago at Westbury, and I saw. Oh, that's weird. That's red. Why is that red? Didn't understand that there were Gulf red ones. This is much later.
But yeah, there's again. This is for the sand train, so there's quite a lot of Dutch ones in the 90s, but there were still quite a few olive green ones. I don't think there were any Gulf red ones on the Southern. But there were definitely quite a lot of olive ones. But I've got some olive ones. So this is it. This is all I'm doing. So I just thought I'd have a few more Dutch ones.
Yeah, and like I say, for me, it's going to be those and barbells that are going to be the kind of really ropey looking ones. Bulge. Oh, and some turbots as well. But again, they're going to be civil engineers with a few dents in, rather than an olive one and mostly brown ones and sort of bits with lots of black and rust and stuff like that.
So if you have a look at any of Paul Wade's, that's kind of how they are. They're patchy.
I can see you closing your eyes thinking, "No, why?" A whale. I once saw a whale in Wales.
Well, yes, because when they were this colour, they transferred them to the Midland because they would. I can't remember why. I think the Southern civil engineer was a little bit worried about axle loads because they are very heavy and they're very long, and they started to bend the frames, so they rebuilt them and moved them off to somebody else and went back to shorter wagons because they could get the load in.
This is the Cambrian kit, isn't it?
Yes. Again, bit of a pig. Bits in the end. All the bits inside the hopper ends don't actually fit. Or I couldn't get them to fit. I was following the instructions and they wouldn't fit. So they're all just built out of plastic, I think. And there's an awful lot of holes and filling and filing and swearing to get those done.
Yeah.
The overhead cages, though, are amazingly, when you get the plastic mold, it's see-through. So he's managed to mold the mesh and it's scale. So I filed the bottom of it a little bit just to open all of them out because around the edge the plastic had flooded in a little bit. But there's only a bit of filing. They're not brass. You can see through them and they're plastic.
Right.
They're really quite something. But then the body is a weird concoction of like this huge ugly bathtub with these flat sides that you stick to it, and the ends don't quite fit on because the tub's badly molded around the outside. It's another one of those. It's not entirely enjoyable, but how else are you going to get one? No one's going to do these ready to run because there was only a couple of hundred of them.
Yeah, what's the choice? MTK?
Well, if it was one of his pressed aluminium ones, maybe not. But some of them were brass, so they wouldn't be so bad because it'd be thumps and rivets. It's basically just a sheet of flat brass, and you'd stamp it all out yourself. So depending on your level of skill, depends on how good the result is.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I love Tunbridge West Yards, Paul Wade's layout so much is because, he's taken MTK kits and made them look good.
Yeah,
which
it's phenomenal. I don't know how he does it.
exactly, it's like mind blown, baffled type of thing.
He also knew Colin Massingham personally, so some of the things on Tunbridge West Yard was stamped specifically for him.
Right.
So he said, I need a departmental vehicle. It doesn't have these windows in it. And Colin stamped him a coach side with the windows missing or not stamped out. So some of the things they're genuinely one-offs.
There was a funny thing that I saw on the DMU forum about a month ago now, maybe a bit more. And it was, they're talking about the seahorse, I think it was, or sea urchin. It was the sea urchin. And it's like, okay, I'm going to put the Cambrian kit one together and, some bit of stuff. And it's like, I'm not sure the whole, the structure's quite right. And Paul Wade said, yes, it is. Because here's the drawing I made for the guy who does the Cambrian kit. So
yes, exactly. It's right, okay? It's right. Just just accept it, okay? But again, that's because whoever was originally Cambrian, I can't remember his name. It's not. He sold it now to someone else, but he knew Paul, or Paul knew him, because he lived on the south coast somewhere.
I was going to say I think he lived in.
Something like Bexhill, wasn't it? Bexhill-on-Sea, somewhere like that.
Yeah, like Ramsgate, something like that. Because he came, I've only ever been to One Lid Rail, and he came to that, and it's like, because a little guy, really nice.
Yeah. And he came with his little wooden stand with all his wagons on.
Yeah, and it's almost like a dull boy, sort of just no. Actually, let me do a different version. The pub with the guy with all the watches in sort of this big coat, and he talks like that. It's almost like that. It just like
I just went, I've got these wagons here.
Yeah,
something for the weekend, sir.
Yeah.
I have those seahorses, thank you.
But yeah, and actually, sort of jumping subjects for the comedy of it, I saw something on Twitter a few days ago which made me chuckle. And it was a bit like this, like we're talking about the sea urchin thing. Well, here's the drawing I did, and his is based upon my drawing. So, and it was about, we got this Brexit and stuff going on. And someone on Twitter's, tried doing some mansplaining to some Irish lady, saying, you obviously haven't read the Anglo-Irish Agreement. And she's then got a picture of her holding the book, the Anglo-Irish Agreement, with her name written on it, because she wrote the book on the Anglo-Irish Agreement. I just thought that was fantastic. It's just
brilliant.
Yeah, that's just, I just love that. Now, this one I find interesting because it has the plates over.
Yes, so that's a Bachmann one, and it was in that livery, but Bachmann don't do a plated version, so it's all planked. Yeah. And the only reason I did that was because on one of the Appleby Model Engineering sheets, all of those, apart from the little S&T logo, are on one of his sheets. So I could plate it, repaint it, fit the handrails to it instead of the moulded handrails. And as long as I masked off the S&T thing, I could do it all. So that's Wild Rider red, and again, that is actually warning panel yellow because it was quite bright. And that's as it is for S&T use. It got then transferred to, I think, as a propelling van somewhere, and then it became a riding van somewhere else before it was withdrawn. And by the time they withdrew it, it was pink. It was pink and white almost. But when it was originally done, it was those nice bright S&T colours, which is what I'm working on here. So I've got some LML tubes that I'm doing as well. But yeah, that's
should have got a picture of it. Yeah.
So it was a very bright, as you can see, and plated.
Yeah.
And that one, the Bachmann moulds are thick enough that is just 10 thou plasticard cut to shape and super glued over the top of the original model.
Oh, right.
But then I've had to repaint it, and of course all the transfers. It obliterates all the lettering when you put the side on. So the only reason I did that was because I had the sheet. Otherwise, I'd have just flogged it on eBay and moved on.
Yeah, because I want to do it myself. I've already painted it, but then I realised, that's different. So it's been sort of on the, I'll do it one day. But now you say that, now I'm sort of tempted to have another go. There was one Paul Wade did, which was in a light grey. Oh, wait a minute. No, it wasn't. It was the construction liveried one.
Yeah, it's the one that Guy did it, I think. So it was at Westbury
Yeah.
or somewhere, and it's now it got moved around. So that again, it's a similar sort of thing. They used it for propelling moves because it's nice and it's got verandas to keep the rain off.
Yeah, it was used
and it rides nicely.
It was used on the segments trains.
Yeah, originally. So down to Cheriton.
Yeah. Now these are interesting.
Those are 3D prints.
Oh right, okay.
So the ends and all of the underframe is a 3D print, and you basically buy, if you're lucky and you can find one on eBay. Hornby actually did their curtain-sided van as that,
right?
And all you do is you cut the ends off and slide it over the top of the 3D print.
Right.
I didn't, of course. I wasn't lucky enough. So those are just sprayed red out of a can, and those are Railtech transfers.
Right.
That's what you do. So basically, you buy the 3D print, and it's literally you push brass bearings into the holes, and you put the wheels in, and you put it down, and it's square, and it runs. Right. It's just genius. But that's kind of where things are going now. So that's 3D printing is, it's where it's at now, I think. No, yeah, the body shells, you literally just cut the ends off the Hornby model and slide it on, and that's it. Don't even have to glue it.
The funny thing is, I actually have three. I bought 5 of the Hornby bodies recently. I thought these were much longer, or am I thinking of a different wagon? The Procore ones.
No, the Campbell Soup ones were that length, and Hornby actually did their curtain sider as a Campbell Soup van at one point. Right. The longer ones are. The Procore curtain siders, they all ended up in Ministry of Defence traffic eventually, but the Procore ones were like 1.5 times as long, or 1.3 times as long, and they're completely different, except they've got a curtain.
Yeah, because these are the ones I want to do.
Yeah.
And they're a lot longer, I think.
Whoever had Falcon before Lucy Pitch bought it, did one.
Yeah,
and I did one and sold it to someone, and they sold it to someone else, and it kind of reappeared somewhere.
Right.
But yeah, that's a complete scratch build.
Yeah, because that's what I want to do with mine. I basically bought the Hornby sides, so I bought the Hornby one because basically it's my friend again. I don't know. Give me a sec.
It's probably a queue.
Sorry about that. I bought, and I remember that these ones are longer. There's a drawing that was it Stevens, something Stevens or something? I can't remember. Robert Stevens, is it? Stephen Roberts? I can't remember. Yes. It was in Model Rail magazine some years ago, and in it. It's like, okay, to do this, I took the Hornby model and I basically chopped it and, took. So I've effectively got, I want to do 3. Maybe I might be able to get 4 by chopping one of them into little pieces and adding them to the end to make the sides. And then
you've got to be really careful when you chop the Hornby van up, though, because it's really difficult to get the joins correct, because those things down the side aren't evenly spaced.
Yeah, I mean, what I was thinking is, plasticard behind to reinforce it and create a nice shape, and then use the Games Workshop
green stuff,
green
stuff.
Green stuff. Just fill it, get it right, and then just green stuff to fill it up and
you could, when I did mine, you can see the join, even though I did it between the straps. But you can still see the join because the curtain, the stretchy curtain shape that they did in the side isn't constrained within the space. So it just looks like a join. Doesn't matter what you do, it looks like a join. But you're right, I'd green stuff it now.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll make this the last one.
Yes.
Because you got stuff to do in the background, and we started late, so and I've got a rake of these to do as well.
So I've only done the 2. So The one on the right is an 8-shoe pipe. So again, it's this thing with Parkside kits. Every Parkside kit is the original version of the wagon. So the one on the left is as the LNER built it, basically, with 4-shoe push brakes. And there's a lot of them like that. But when they move on to 8-shoe brakes, Parkside do nothing apart from the VEA.
Right.
For traditional wagons. Vans, they do lots of class brake vans because lots of vans were class brake from new. So they do the van wide, and I think you can get class brakes on one of the 12-ton vans now. But almost everything that Parkside do is either early vacuum fitted with push brakes or unfitted.
Right.
So that's a van chassis. That's not it's a stretched van chassis underneath it rather than a kit chassis modified.
Oh, right. Okay. I didn't know that.
Like it. So they don't do anything like it. So yeah, that one's an old one repainted, and that's the Project Mercury livery, where they put these lovely, very clearly defined black boxes on the side and put all the lettering in it.
Yeah, which makes life easy.
It is, but it's a pig to do because, like, the pull code is actually the pull came off of a sheet, and then the code has to be made up of individual 2-inch numbers.
Yeah, this is exactly what I mean. Like, just get a decal sheet done with all the ones you want and just stick them on separately.
Yeah. And again, if I knew how to do it, or if I could talk to Guy nicely, I'd get him to do me a sheet of these sorts of things. Because if you're doing one or two, it's fine. But if you want to do half a dozen, then you just go mad. It took me probably a couple of hours to letter those, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone.
No,
because even the numbers have to be done because actually on each wagon they're different. So on one wagon the KDB is like 5-inch letters. On the other one it's the standard 4-inch.
Yeah,
I don't know why, but it's just that they're individual. So every number is individual. You can't if you could actually make up a block, in the way that Railtech does it, where you'd actually get that on the sheet in a block and you could just slide it straight off. Yeah, that'd be great.
That's exactly what I'm looking to do because, as I said, it took me a day to put the transfers on 3 wagons. You know, a whole evening.
I mean, these take ages.
Yeah.
And it's just that's why I only do a couple because life's too short.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That's the reason. That was what my head was thinking. It's like, okay, well, I could do it the cheap way, which was actually buy a lot of expensive transfers. But once you bought them, you've got them. You know, you don't really think about it after that. And then, you know, sort of cut and shut all these little tiny pieces together and takes ages and ages, and it's cheaper. Or you could spend, let's say it costs you 100 quid to get an A4 sheet of paper done.
It wouldn't cost that much,
wouldn't it? I don't know.
No, I think the art. Well, the thing is, if you talk to Guy, he designs his own and he just prints them out on transfer paper.
Yeah.
So it would be cheaper to buy the software and draw the graphics up. I think he uses. He told me what he used. You can if you talk to Guy on the forum and ask him what he uses. He draws them up by hand and he scans a picture. So he uses the software to import a picture of the wagon, and you trace round. It automatically traces round the outlines, and then you can do something. You can kind of zoom into a really pixel level view of it and straighten all the edges out, and then when you zoom back out again, it's all smoothed off.
It sounds a little bit like Photoshop, really.
It is, but it's a bit more complicated than that because you have to you can take something that's at an angle and straighten it out. You can sort of GIMP it, but in the software.
Yeah.
But yeah, talk to Guy.
Yeah, I got a copy.
You can sort all that out.
Yeah, I got a copy.
I can't remember it's a free software package that he uses.
Right.
But yeah, it kind of just it picks the and things in high contrast. It's great for. So white on black, it will pick it up really easily.
Yeah. Yeah, like I say, I really, really would like to just have a sheet and I just cut a square out, stick it in water, stick it on, and it's done.
Yeah,
that'll make life so much easier.
I know, because these are just hard work.
Yeah, an example was those RRA runners. The yellow one wasn't so bad. The black chassis one, there wasn't any box thing to, and even then it was too wide and it was too tall. So I had to basically cut it off as a separate piece, cut it, splice it shorter, and stick it on at a time. Oh, it was nice.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. And it would be great if somebody just did that. So if the problem with Railtech is he's swamped with people asking him to do stuff, but actually the stuff he does is basically using this software. So he takes pictures of real wagons, scans the data panels in, and then puts them onto a sheet. So you actually, he would have literally, if he'd done pipes, then he would have taken these pictures off the internet and he would have produced that as a block just by putting it into the software, tidying it up, and then printing it. But that's why his transfers are quite pricey for the size they are.
Yeah,
because they are custom made,
and they're very, very good quality as well.
Yes.
I've used several of them.
Yes, but that's why it's £5 for a small sheet, whereas Fox is £5 for an enormous sheet because they're just using commercial lettering.
Yeah, I did have a nightmare recently. A few months ago, I did show it to you because it's easier. Models, commissions. So I did this.
Yep.
And it's not a very good shot there actually, but where is it? 37s. I think I got a better shot. One of these. And this was a nightmare to do. It really was. The transfers themselves. These logos were really, really difficult. Because, I mean, all I did was I took a 37706 model and I removed the number and just, got a bit of, a bit of IPA and just rubbed it a bit to, smudge it all out and things like that. Because it was a number of years later. It'd been painted like 4 years before or something, and all they did was they just put a box over it, painted the two-tone grey, and then stuck a Transworld sticker on.
Yeah.
Now the Fox transfer, the blue and white part is one part, the red ring is another one,
is another part,
and then you've got the white, a white clear one. Well, the problem is that you can see how the bottom of the T aligns to the line, separation line. Well, you can't just put the white transfer on, let that dry, and then put the red one on and let that dry, and then put the blue one on and let that dry, because you don't know where the T is going to be. So what I had to do was effectively put all three layers on at the same time.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And then basically wet it underneath to be able to move it again. The two red lines on the bottom were done separately.
Yeah.
But just to do that circle. And I spoke to the lady on the phone at Fox, and she said, well, the problem is that when those transfers were made, they were lining everything up by hand. So... and, effectively, it would just like the sheet of paper would be put on the printer and be brushed up against the edge, and they hoped it would be in the right place. But they couldn't do it as a single transfer because they would have to print each color a different day. So you do the white, and then you leave it to dry, and you do like 5, 6, 8 sheets, whatever. So you'll do that, and then you put it aside, leave it to dry, and then the next day you put the red on, and then you put it down to dry, and then the next day
you get them out. They'd be out of register, which is no longer an issue, I don't think. But it always used to be with Airfix kits, didn't it? That all the RF roundels would be off centre. Yeah.
So the way that they ended up, they ended up doing them separate pieces, so that way, because she said that in order to be able to get them right, they'd have to print, they'd lose like 10-to-1 ratio in order to be able to get one that was actually properly registered.
Yeah.
And, so it was easier to just do them as separate pieces and let you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And even now, when you get RAF roundels on models now, they tend to leave the red dot out. Yeah. So they'll print the blue and the white, and obviously the white's smaller than the blue.
Yeah.
So it's never going to come outside of it, but they'll give you the red dot so you can place it yourself and center it, which is why I wondered why they didn't do the red and the white, so the white would be smaller than the red, so it would never be out of register, and then just give you the blue to get it right.
Yeah.
Because they could, then they probably wouldn't have had a dropout rate at all if they'd done the blue bit separately, printed the red the second day. As long as the red ring is bigger than the white ring, it would never. It couldn't be that badly out of register.
Well, they said it could be as much as a millimetre.
I still think they'd be all right if they did it that way. But yeah, I can see it's a lot easier for them to do red, white, and blue on the same sheet.
Yeah, of course,
not in the same place, but just in different places on the same sheet. Because yeah, it's easier.
Yeah.
The other thing that used to bug me about that was that the red and the white sometimes was bigger than the red, or that they gave you those white blanking patches. Sometimes they're slightly bigger than the thing you're putting over the top, so you end up with a white line.
Because
the transfers, because the white one doesn't shrink, the colours do, but the other ones don't shrink.
Yeah, you can see an ever so slight bit of white around the edge.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I think the white, whatever they print the white in, doesn't shrink as much as the colours. Because transfers, if anybody's doesn't notice, the transfers actually shrink a bit as they dry. So when you get them wet, they expand, and then they'll shrink as they dry, which is why those two coloured transfers are a pain in the arse, because you don't know how much they're going to expand and shrink.
Yeah, and one of the other ones that I've had recently, which was I'm doing a model of 9129.
Yeah.
And so the first problem is that the original transfer sheet was done to be put on the red alone.
Yeah.
Because there was an IMREX international model. No, I forgot what it was. It was in in Model Rail magazine. Which was a 16-page supplement to Rail magazine back in those days.
Back in the day.
Yep. And so it was the show for the IMREX, and I think it would have been when it was this IMREX 92. It was done in 92. Yeah. So what had happened was someone showed the models that they'd done of all four locos, and they'd had the transfers made. Well, of course, I now realise they were made by Fox. Makes sense. They were the best at the time. And so, and still are in many, many ways. So the real ones hadn't really been done at the time because they were to be like given away, I don't know, as gifts or something for, for the part of this Freight Connection 92 held at the NEC that year. So he basically painted them up in these color schemes. And so he got Fox to do the transfers for him. Well, when we look at the, let me just find the loco. Locos, electric, 90, on the modeling, 91, 129, and so if we look, the DB logo is somewhat small with the number of the side. There's a lot of space between them. Even on the five-sided one, there's a reasonable amount of space. But and you can see if you estimate between the bottom of the radiator fan here and the bottom of the body, it goes roughly halfway down because it's the DB logo.
I'd say so. Yeah.
Ring, so roughly halfway. When we look at the model, when I went to put the transfers on,
huge.
Yeah, it's like
that's like S scale, isn't it? It's like 1/64th instead of 1/76th.
Yeah, so it's like a third too big, effectively. And just like barely be any red between the bottom of that. And so I'm gonna get Fox to make me some, but it's gonna cost I think it was 37 quid, which isn't so bad, really.
No, not if you're doing a commission, no.
No, and when they were because I think I've got it.
Of course, the other thing is you could probably find some DB transfers in HO that would be okay.
Yeah, I could do. Yeah, I recently put them in. Maybe it was.
But it's funny because although Fox tend to be a little bit overscale. In a lot of things, which is fine because we're talking fractions. But I got some of the Rail Freight red logos off of Railtech. So just the red, the vinyl that they put on wagons.
Yeah,
and they're all about 10% too small. The whole sheet. I mean, and that's the size they are, because I've seen somebody else has got a sheet as well. That is the size they are. But when you put them on the wagon, they're about 10% too small compared to the things that BR actually used.
Right.
So I think he's measured the ones up on the locos.
Mm.
And Fox do them, and they're noticeably larger, and they look better on the wagons, but they're a little bit too big for the locos.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting.
So when they were done up for at Crew Electric, when they were painted up for this freight connection, they were painted in the Belgian, German, and French liveries, based on the Cyvic at the bottom there. But the German one, you can see it's basically just all the fully painted red with this yellow bit on the top, and you can see how it's got the logo and it's round in black. Sorry, in red around the edges.
Yeah, but it's a white end, isn't it? It's not.
Yeah.
It's,
so
it's DB white, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the
when it went into traffic, didn't they put a yellow bit on the end?
Yeah,
that was literally at the exhibition. It was that. So it's actually DB style. So the Belgian one had the yellow band across the nose, but it didn't actually have a warning panel yellow end. But when they went into traffic,
they painted
they changed the ends. Yeah. So the DB one got a bit of an odd shape to it. Yeah. See, so
the DB one, out of all of them, I think the DB one looked best, because if we look, it's a little bit more lemon, but they managed to get it to look right. For the French one,
that just doesn't work because it's orange and yellow, isn't it?
Yeah. And also something else I've noticed is how it's got an angled piece on the end there.
Oh yeah.
Whereas, and like the whole front end section is painted in the same color. But it didn't take very long before they just went straight with black. So they painted the whole buffer beam area black and just straight.
Oh yeah.
So that was only a few months really that it spent. I mean, that's several years. That's a couple of years later, and you can see 136 in the background there. But the German one, I actually think looked quite nice because they just painted yellow end on and left that little bit of white red trim around the edge.
Yeah, I think that did look quite swish.
Yeah, so out of the three, that was my favorite, and I'm modeling it exactly as it is there. So I actually did when I painted it. So I painted. I decided that I didn't want to have the Fox transfer, which has just got the white, hasn't got the red stripe on. It's just got the white, because if you get rid of the yellow, all you had was
red
with white on it.
Yeah, that's a bit like 33008, isn't it? If you look at the white cheat line down the side on 33008,
it's got a little red line.
Yeah, it's got a tiny red line either side of it.
Mm. So what I did when I painted mine was to paint white, paint the yellow one, leave. I made sure this was nice pure white, and around the window frames. And then I went and masked the edge of that off, and then then painted the yellow, and then painted red to leave the space afterwards, because painting red over yellow is a bit of a problem, and I'd had some issues already with the logos I was doing. I was frustrated with the French one because I was masking it all off really carefully, and a stray tiny triangle of yellow, because I'd painted yellow and then was going to paint the orange. A tiny triangle of paint. A tiny triangle of carefully cut masking tape managed to find itself on the yellow. So when I then gave it I had to give it a second coat of yellow because I had a slight smudge on it and it was starting to show through a little bit. So I tried to put another one, and then it ended up looking like a pockmark because the layer of paint, just sort of went down and it just looked horrible. So I ended up stripping it down again. So I ended up stripping the loco 3 times to get it right. in the end. But so yeah, so what happened was when it came to the Fox transfers, all you've got is white, and the red bit here is actually just a clear bit. So
so
I
you've
had
got to paint it red.
Yeah, well, how do you do that? Well, the only thing I could think of would be sort of paint red underneath, put white on the top, and put the transfer on, and then like really, really carefully with a paintbrush, just like try and go around the edge to get this nice and
The other
clean.
thing you could do is if you've got model master transfers, they're printed on an entire sheet of transfer material. So what you can do is paint a corner of a model master transfer red, put the white transfer on it, and then actually carefully cut around it to give you the shape, and then put the transfer onto the model.
Yeah, that could work. So in the end, and then and then when I went to put the side on, before I even was going to do that, I went to put the side on while I'd left, get it all, because it was all ready to go. I painted red, and then I was just going to pop some while I left that red to paint to dry, I thought I'll stick the side transfers on, and then suddenly realized they were massive and out of shape, wrong size. So it's like, so yeah. So in the end, I'm just going to put get the transfers done to exactly what I need, and also the B logo on the Belgian one. But
I was going to say, isn't that little DB on the side? Isn't that the size that they put on wagons now? So doesn't somebody do DB Schenker logos for wagons? Like, is that Railtech?
Possibly. I don't know.
Have a look at the sheet.
Yeah.
Have a look at Railtech, see if they do a DB Schenker logo for wagons, because that might save you having to pay Fox lots of money.
Yeah, but the problem is the typeface for the 9129 was very specific and didn't look similar. I did look at DB logos and see
that would be a DB typeface though. So any German transfers should do.
I looked.
It's probably slightly overscaled.
The problem is that the logo it's changed slightly since then, so it looks like they've a bit like how Res used Frutager.
Yeah.
And a couple of other companies have done that as well. So, I thought it might work, but they've gone and changed the typeface a little bit.
So no, you're kind of stuck, aren't you?
But yeah, I got 9129 at 130 looking nice though. I think that came out quite nice.
Yeah, looks good.
Painting that was really hard, trying to get it fit right. So yeah, it came out right. Interesting thing though is I used I have pretty much all British Rail colours correct, down to the British Standard, Pantone, things like that. The one livery I haven't got the data for is the International Slate Grey, which is this upper grey that they used, which became what was used for the for this livery.
Yeah.
And because I was painting this, I decided to paint that at the same time. And I mixed this paint using some slate and some various greys together to sort of just mix and mix until I got it right. A couple of tries. And, I finally got it looking really, really good. Weird thing is, though, it really, really doesn't match with... is it around here somewhere? I do have a picture of it somewhere. When I put it next to the Bachmann one, that grey is way too dark.
And I hadn't realised how off that is, because I think I've got one of those, not 365. It's a different one now. It was probably 365 when I bought it, because originally I had a Helljan one, and of course the colours on the Helljan one were spot on. Which kind of brings us back to where we started.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew what the actual colour was. The best I could do was match it to.
It's interesting because on the Bachmann model, everything looks right until you put it next to the real colours, and then it doesn't look right.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, and the thing about it is that really there's not much else that goes with it, so it's not really that much of a problem.
No, it's always going to sit in isolation, isn't it? So you're probably safe.
Yeah. And so the way that I matched it was do it the old-fashioned way, which is get the real thing, and there was this really nice picture in Rail Express magazine,
Yeah.
and it had it in beautiful sunlight, just a perfect, just one of those perfect days where the colors are nice and bright and vivid, and it's a brand new paint job. So it's like I will use that to match it to. And so, although that looks a bit dark there, when if we just compare, I know it's a different loco, but you can see how the skirting is the same color.
Yeah, it's almost right. Yeah, it's near enough, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's like, okay, I've got that right. And so now I've got two of these that I'm going to have to repaint partially or completely, which is a bit of a pain, but okay, whatever. It's not that hard a livery to do. But yeah, so it does take a bit of time and extra effort. And then there was another problem, which was the rail freight distribution lettering was a completely wrong scale. Because when you look at the let's go for the real thing again. Trains, locos, electrics, 90, modeling 1135. And it's also worth pointing that I modelled it with the clipped oleos with the rubbing plate removed, whereas later they put more freight type buffers on, sort of flattened oleo type things almost. So if you look at the rail freight distribution lettering, you can see how the R is definitely under this. It's probably the A roughly is straight onto there, the corner.
Yeah.
And
the end is halfway along that one.
Down there. Whereas if we look at the Fox transfer, the N would be roughly about halfway, but it's like what 5-8 mil out.
Yeah, it's too short, and it's not going to expand when you soak it the way that
No,
much.
it's not going to expand that much. And I thought, well, let's say, I wonder if how much space can I add between there, and it's like it's still no good.
It's not worth it.
Yeah, so I ended up just getting the I ended up going to Railtech and bought theirs. And when we just go back, sorry, my models, Lucas 90. I thought I had a picture of it on the other side. But either way, it's just right. You can see it's like halfway.
Yeah.
So it's much, much better. I mean, the other one only went through about that far, which was a massive shortness. So yeah, that came out just nice. I was quite happy with that. But yeah, that was a difficult one. And then I did have another irritation, which was that I started painting 9019, and it was looking really, really good. It's like, oh yeah, I managed to get these squares just nice. I did it really, really weirdly. I basically took took one of the transfers that Fox did, sliced it, cut the boxes into like to make a stencil, and then cut it on the model. So I just put masking tape on in the right place, and then just cut carefully around the edge of the model, the transfer, to be able to make the right shape. So it was all masked up and all ready to go. And then when I sprayed it, and I sprayed it at night. And then the next day when I went to look at it, it's like, wait a minute, that looks way too dark. That looks like executive dark grey. And that was when I took a look at the pot of paint, and I discovered that I hadn't mixed it enough. So all the blue had dropped to the bottom, because Res Livery has quite a blue tint to it.
Yeah.
If we look at oh, sorry, wrong way. 9019. It's got very much a blue tint to it. Executive Dark Grey has already got a tint to it like that, but it's a different one.
It's a bluey shade, isn't it?
Yeah.
Instead of the Executive Dark Greys are kind of brown. Is it browny shade or is that
that one's
browny?
also blue, but doesn't look
it's
quite
different. You can see it's not as blue, is it?
Yeah. It's not a good light there. Actually, that's no. It's hard to make it out. It needs something that's the right. I mean, you can see how blue that looks.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's Executive Dark Grey on the roof of that coach. You know.
Yeah, it's black. That's bluer, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I was fortunate because as I've mentioned here and there, I did some commission work for Bachmann, and one of the things, I can give them the information. You can't necessarily make them use it. No. And so one of the ones that I did, for example, was Centro livery, and they went for the later version of it where it didn't have the thin yellow stripe. So they did a class 150. DMU second gen 150, 152, and Centro. So they did the later version with the white stripes on the side, and the like all of the liveries, the grey on the bottom of there is the same grey on the top. So that's rail grey, like you get on freight locos, rail freight distribution, and so on. The same stripes there, but looking at photos like this, the chap who did the artwork thought that it was like this, so that's how he did it. He thought it was white to go with the stripes, but there is a distinct greyness to it. Now, so when it came to Intercity, I wanted to make sure that he knew that coaches, so they were doing the Mark II Fs, and things like the Mark II F RFB, which is the buffet car with sort of the plated up section. So it used to be a first class coach with some plated up windows to have a little buffet counter for, because they'd be 7 coach trains, BSO, 5 TSOs, and an RFB would be a standard 7 coach train. So, well, when these were converted, this is post 1987, which is when they went to Intercity Swallow, and Intercity Swallow uses a sort of warmer grey on the upper body part, whereas Executive Dark Grey, which was old Intercity, is slightly bluer. So, and this is why and you can actually see the change on mainline liveried class 47s, because if they've got full yellow end, that's using Executive Dark Grey, and if they've got half yellow end, that's using Falcon Grey. But I didn't want them, because Bachmann had done all their Intercity stock at that point using Executive Dark Grey, and it's like, okay, we've got to be careful because there is a difference in the colour. So I found this picture of John Deadman's, and I pointed out, I said, look, here is a picture that shows the difference. Now, ignore the fact that you've got a little bit of you got weathering going on. So this would have been painted in Intercity old era. So you can see here's the Intercity executive livery with the old style lettering at the end there, and you can see how this coach matches it. Ignore the lettering there because they just stuck it on later to show who owned it. But you can see that is Executive Dark Grey, and then this one is one that is in grey. and you can see how much of a warmer texture it is. You know, it's carrot and granite, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, and fortunately, I was listened to, and so you know, they've got a color that looks very, very, very good. So I was pleased to see that. But like I say, it just goes to show there's two different shades of what you think would be the same livery, and they're actually not that much the same.
No.
So
anyway,
yes, I was we're finishing off that last picture, and we've talked for who knows how many hours.
Yeah. So I just say thank you very much, everybody, for listening.
Yeah. And thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining us too, Mark, or joining me and therefore us.
That's okay.
Yeah, maybe we can come on another time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's always great to talk about things with other people. You know, I can ramble at an audience for hours and hours, but you know. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll join us again another time. I'm looking to do maybe one of these guest ones every month. So we'll see what happens in the future. So bye-bye, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.